Chapter 33 of the Pioneers, or the Sources of the Susquehanna, a Descriptive Tale by James Fenimore Cooper. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Chapter 33. Fetch here the stocks, ho! You stubborn ancient knave, you reverend braggart, we'll teach you. Lear. The long days and early sun of July allowed time for a gathering of the interested, before the little bell of the academy announced that the appointed hour had arrived for administering right to the wronged, and punishment to the guilty. Ever since the dawn of day, the highways and wood paths that, issuing from the forests and winding among the sides of the mountains, centered in Templeton, had been thronged with equestrians and footmen, bound to the haven of justice. There was to be seen a well-clad yeoman, mounted on a sleek, switch-tailed steed, rambling along the highway, with his red face elevated in a manner that said, "I have paid for my land, and fear no man," while his bosom was swelling with the pride of being one of the grand inquest for the county. At his side rode a companion, his equal in independence of feeling, perhaps, but his inferior in thrift, as in property and consideration. This was a professed dealer in lawsuits, a man whose name appeared in every calendar, whose substance, gained in the multifarious expedients of a settler's changeable habits, was wasted in feeding the harpies of the courts. He was endeavoring to impress the mind of the grand juror with the merits of a cause now at issue. Along with these was a pedestrian, who, having thrown a rifle frock over his shirt, and placed his best wool hat above his sunburnt visage, had issued from his retreat in the woods by a footpath, and was striving to keep company with the others, on his way to hear and to decide the disputes of his neighbors, as a petty juror. 50 similar little knots of countrymen might have been seen, on that morning, journeying toward the shire town on the same errand. By 10 o'clock, the streets of the village were filled with busy faces, some talking of their private concerns, some listening to a popular expounder of political creeds, and others gaping in at the open stores, admiring the finery, or examining scythes, axes, and such other manufactures as attracted their curiosity or excited their admiration. A few women were in the crowd, mostly carrying infants, and followed at a lounging, listless gait by their rustic lords and masters. There was one young couple in whom connubial love was yet fresh, walking at a respectful distance from each other, while the swain directed the timid steps of his bride by a gallant offering of a thumb. At the first stroke of the bell, Richard issued from the door of the Bold Dragoon, flourishing a sheathed sword that he was fond of saying his ancestors had carried in one of Cromwell's victories, and crying in an authoritative tone to "clear the way for the court." The order was obeyed promptly, though not servilely, the members of the crowd nodding familiarly to the members of the procession as it passed. A party of constables, with their staves, followed the sheriff, preceding Marmaduke and 4 plain, grave-looking yeomen, who were his associates on the bench. There was nothing to distinguish these subordinate judges from the better part of the spectators, except gravity, which they affected a little more than common, and that one of their number was attired in an old-fashioned military coat, with skirts that reached no lower than the middle of his thighs, and bearing 2 little silver epaulets, not half so big as a modern pair of shoulder-knots. This gentleman was a colonel of the militia, in attendance on a court-martial, who found leisure to steal a moment from his military to attend to his civil jurisdiction. But this incongruity excited neither notice nor comment. 3 or 4 clean-shaved lawyers followed, as meek as if they were lambs going to the slaughter. 1 or 2 of their number had contrived to obtain an air of scholastic gravity by wearing spectacles. The rear was brought up by another posse of constables, and the mob followed the whole into the room where the court held its sitting. The edifice was composed of a basement of squared logs, perforated here and there with small grated windows, through which a few wistful faces were gazing at the crowd without. Among the captives were the guilty, downcast countenances of the counterfeiters, and the simple but honest features of the Leatherstocking. The dungeons were to be distinguished externally from the debtors' apartments only by the size of the apertures, the thickness of the grates, and by the heads of the spikes that were driven into the logs as a protection against the illegal use of edge-tools. The upper story was of framework, regularly covered with boards, and contained one room decently fitted up for the purpose of justice. A bench, raised on a narrow platform to the height of a man above the floor, and protected in front by a light railing, ran along one of its sides. In the center was a seat furnished with rude arms, that was always filled by the presiding judge. In front, on a level with the floor of the room, was a large table covered with green baize, and surrounded by benches, and at either of its ends were rows of seats, rising one over the other for jury boxes. Each of these divisions was surrounded by a railing. The remainder of the room was an open square, appropriated to the spectators. When the judges were seated, the lawyers had taken possession of the table, and the noise of moving feet had ceased in the area. The proclamations were made in the usual form, the jurors were sworn, the charge was given, and the court proceeded to hear the business before them. We shall not detain the reader with a description of the captious discussions that occupied the court for the first 2 hours. Judge Temple had impressed on the jury, in his charge, the necessity for dispatch on their part, recommending to their notice, from motives of humanity, the prisoners in the jail as the first objects of their attention. Accordingly, after the period we have mentioned had elapsed, the cry of the officer to clear the way for the grand jury announced the entrance of that body. The usual forms were observed, when the foreman handed up to the bench 2 bills, on both of which the judge observed, at the first glance of his eye, the name of Nathaniel Bumppo. It was a leisure moment with the court. Some low whispering passed between the bench and the sheriff, who gave a signal to his officers, and in a very few minutes the silence that prevailed was interrupted by a general movement in the outer crowd, when presently the Leatherstocking made his appearance, ushered into the criminal's bar under the custody of 2 constables. The hum ceased, the people closed into the open space again, and the silence soon became so deep that the hard breathing of the prisoner was audible. Natty was dressed in his buckskin garments, without his coat, in place of which he wore only a shirt of coarse linen cheek, fastened at his throat by the sinew of a deer, leaving his red neck and weather-beaten face exposed and bare. It was the first time that he had ever crossed the threshold of a court of justice, and curiosity seemed to be strongly blended with his personal feelings. He raised his eyes to the bench, thence to the jury boxes, the bar, and the crowd without, meeting everywhere looks fastened on himself. After surveying his own person as searching the cause of this unusual attraction, he once more turned his face around the assemblage, and opened his mouth in one of his silent and remarkable laughs. "Prisoner, remove your cap," said Judge Temple. The order was either unheard or unheeded. "Nathaniel Bumppo, be uncovered," repeated the judge. Natty started at the sound of his name, and raising his face earnestly toward the bench, he said, "Anan." Mr. Lippet arose from his seat at the table, and whispered in the ear of the prisoner, when Natty gave him a nod of assent, and took the deerskin covering from his head. "Mr. District Attorney," said the judge, "the prisoner is ready. We wait for the indictment." The duties of public prosecutor were discharged by Dirk Van der School, who adjusted his spectacles, cast a cautious look around him at his brethren of the bar, which he ended by throwing his head aside so as to catch one glance over the glasses, when he proceeded to read the bill aloud. It was the usual charge for an assault and battery on the person of Hiram Doolittle, and was couched in the ancient language of such instruments, especial care having been taken by the scribe not to omit the name of a single offensive weapon known to the law. When he had done, Mr. Van der School removed his spectacles, which he closed and placed in his pocket, seemingly for the pleasure of again opening and replacing them on his nose. After this evolution was repeated once or twice, he handed the bill over to Mr. Lippet, with a cavalier air, that said as much as, "Pick a hole in that if you can." Natty listened to the charge with great attention, leaning forward toward the reader with an earnestness that denoted his interest. and when it was ended he raised his tall body to the utmost, and drew a long sigh. All eyes were turned to the prisoner, whose voice was vainly expected to break the stillness of the room. "You have heard the presentment that the grand jury have made, Nathaniel Bumppo," said the judge. "What do you plead to the charge?" The old man drooped his head for a moment in a reflecting attitude, and then raising it, he laughed before he answered. "That I handled the man a little rough or so is not to be denied, but that there was occasion to make use of all the things that the gentleman has spoken of is downright untrue. I am not much of a wrestler, seeing that I am getting old, but I was out among the Scotch Irishers, let me see, it must have been as long ago as the first year of the old war—" "Mr. Lippet, if you are retained for the prisoner," interrupted Judge Temple, "instruct your client how to plead. If not, the court will assign him counsel." Aroused from studying the indictment by this appeal, the attorney got up, and after a short dialogue with the hunter in a low voice, he informed the court that they were ready to proceed. "Do you plead guilty or not guilty?" said the judge. "I may say not guilty with a clean conscience," returned Natty, "for there's no guilt in doing what's right, and I'd rather died on the spot than had him put foot in the hut at that moment." Richard started at this declaration, and bent his eyes significantly on Hiram, who returned the look with a slight movement of his eyebrows. "Proceed to open the cause, Mr. District Attorney," continued the judge. "Mr. Clerk, enter the plea of not guilty." After a short opening address from Mr. Van der School, Hiram was summoned to the bar to give his testimony. It was delivered to the letter, perhaps, but with all that moral coloring which can be conveyed under such expressions as "thinking no harm," "feeling it my bounden duty as a magistrate," and "seeing that the constable was back'ard in the business." When he had done, and the district attorney declined putting any further interrogatories, Mr. Lippet arose with an air of keen investigation, and asked the following questions: "Are you a constable of this county, sir?" "No, sir," said Hiram, "I'm only a justice peace." "I ask you, Mr. Doolittle, in the face of this court, putting it to your conscience and your knowledge of the law, whether you had any right to enter that man's dwelling?" "Hum," said Hiram, undergoing a violent struggle between his desire for vengeance and his love of legal fame. "I do suppose that that is, strict law, that supposing, maybe I hadn't a real, lawful right; but as the case was, and Billy was so back'ard, I thought I might come forward in the business. I ask you again, sir," continued the lawyer, following up his success, "whether this friendless old man did or did not repeatedly forbid your entrance?" "Why, I must say," said Hiram, "that he was considerable cross-grained. Not what I call clever, seeing that it was only one neighbor wanting to go into the house of another." "Oh, then you own it was only meant for a neighborly visit on your part, and without the sanction of law. Remember, gentlemen, the words of the witness, one neighbor wanting to enter the house of another. Now, sir, I ask you if Nathaniel Bumppo did not again and again order you not to enter?" "There was some words passed between us," said Hiram, "but I read the warrant to him aloud. I repeat my question, did he tell you not to enter his habitation?" "There was a good deal passed betwixt us, but I've the warrant in my pocket. Maybe the court would wish to see it?" "Witness," said Judge Temple, "answer the question directly. Did or did not the prisoner forbid your entering his hut?" "Why, I some think—" "Answer without equivocation," continued the judge sternly. "He did." "And did you attempt to enter after his order?" "I did." "But the warrant was in my hand." "Proceed, Mr. Lippet, with your examination." But the attorney saw that the impression was in favor of his client, and waving his hand with a supercilious manner, as if unwilling to insult the understanding of the jury with any further defense, he replied: "No, sir, I leave it for your honor to charge. I rest my case here." "Mr. District Attorney," said the judge, "have you anything to say?" Mr. Van der School removed his spectacles, folded them, and, replacing them once more on his nose, eyed the other bill which he held in his hand, and then said, looking at the bar over the top of his glasses, "I shall rest the prosecution here, if the court please." Judge Temple arose and began the charge. "Gentlemen of the jury," he said, "you have heard the testimony, and I shall detain you but a moment. If an officer meet with resistance in the execution of a process, he has an undoubted right to call any citizen to his assistance, and the acts of such assistant come within the protection of the law. I shall leave you to judge, gentlemen, from the testimony, how far the witness in this prosecution can be so considered, feeling less reluctance to submit the case thus informally to your decision, because there is yet another indictment to be tried, which involves heavier charges against the unfortunate prisoner." The tone of Marmaduke was mild and insinuating, and, as his sentiments were given with such apparent impartiality, they did not fail of carrying due weight with the jury. The grave-looking yeomen who composed this tribunal laid their heads together for a few minutes, without leaving the box, when the foreman arose, and, after the forms of the court were duly observed, he pronounced the prisoner to be not guilty. "You are acquitted of this charge, Nathaniel Bumppo," said the judge. "Anan," said Natty. "You are found not guilty of striking and assaulting Mr. Doolittle." "No, I'll not deny but that I took him a little roughly by the shoulders," said Natty, looking about him with great simplicity, "and that I—" "You are acquitted," interrupted the judge, "and there is nothing further to be said or done in the matter." A look of joy lighted up the features of the old man, who now comprehended the case, and, placing his cap eagerly on his head again, he threw up the bar of his little prison, and said feelingly, "I must say this for you, Judge Temple, that the law has not been so hard on me as I dreaded. I hope God will bless you for the kind things you've done to me this day." But the staff of the constable was opposed to his egress, and Mr. Lippet whispered a few words in his ear, when the aged hunter sank back into his place, and, removing his cap, stroked down the remnants of his gray and sandy locks, with an air of mortification mingled with submission. "Mr. District Attorney," said Judge Temple, affecting to busy himself with his minutes, "proceed with the second indictment." Mr. Van der School took great care that no part of the presentment, which he now read, should be lost on his auditors. It accused the prisoner of resisting the execution of a search warrant, by force of arms, and particularized in the vague language of the law, among a variety of other weapons, the use of the rifle. This was indeed a more serious charge than an ordinary assault and battery, and a corresponding degree of interest was manifested by the spectators in its result. The prisoner was duly arraigned, and his plea again demanded. Mr. Lippet had anticipated the answers of Natty, and in a whisper advised him how to plead. But the feelings of the old hunter were awakened by some of the expressions in the indictment, and, forgetful of his caution, he exclaimed, "'Tis a wicked untruth. I crave no man's blood. Them thieves, the Iroquois, won't say it to any face that I ever thirsted after man's blood. I have fought as soldier that feared his Maker and his officer, but I never pulled trigger on any but a warrior that was up and awake. No man can say that I ever struck even a Mingo in his blanket. I believe there's some who thinks there's no God in a wilderness." "Attend to your plea, Bumppo," said the judge. "You hear that you are accused of using your rifle against an officer of justice. Are you guilty or not guilty?" By this time the irritated feelings of Natty had found vent, and he rested on the bar for a moment, in a musing posture, when he lifted his face with his silent laugh, and, pointing to where the woodchoppers stood, he said, "Would Billy Kirby be standing there, d'ye think, if I had used the rifle?" "Then you deny it," said Mr. Lippet. "You plead not guilty." "Sartain," said Natty. "Billy knows that I never fired at all. Billy, do you remember the turkey last winter? Ah, me! That was better than common firing, but I can't shoot as I used to could." "Enter the plea of not guilty," said Judge Temple, strongly affected by the simplicity of the prisoner. Hiram was again sworn, and his testimony given on the second charge. He had discovered his former error, and proceeded more cautiously than before. He related very distinctly, and for the man with amazing terseness, the suspicion against the hunter, the complaint, the issuing of the warrant, and the swearing in of Kirby, all of which he affirmed were done in due form of law. He then added the manner in which the constable had been received, and stated distinctly that Natty had pointed the rifle at Kirby, and threatened his life if he attempted to execute his duty. All this was confirmed by Jotham, who was observed to adhere closely to the story of the magistrate. Mr. Lippet conducted an artful cross-examination of these two witnesses, but after consuming much time was compelled to relinquish the attempt to obtain any advantage, in despair. At length the district attorney called the woodchopper to the bar. Billy gave an extremely confused account of the whole affair, although he evidently aimed at the truth, until Mr. Vanderschool aided him by asking some direct questions. "It appears from examining the papers that you demanded admission into the hut legally, so you were put in bodily fear by his rifle and threats?" "I didn't mind them that, man," said Billy, snapping his fingers. "I should be a poor stick to mind old Leatherstocking."
"But I understood you to say, referring to your previous words, as delivered here in court, in the commencement of your testimony, that you thought he meant to shoot you."
"To be sure I did, and so would you, too, squire, if you had seen a chap dropping a muzzle that never misses, and cocking an eye that has a natural squint by long practice. I thought there would be dust on it, and my back was up at once. But Leatherstocking gin up the skin, and so the matter ended." "Ah, Billy," said Natty, shaking his head, "'twas a lucky thought in me to throw out the hide, or there might have been blood spilt; and I'm sure, if it had been yourn, I should have mourned it sorely, the little while I have to stay." "Well, Leatherstocking," returned Billy, facing the prisoner with a freedom and familiarity that utterly disregarded the presence of the court, "as you are on the subject, it may be that you've no—" "Go on with your examination, Mr. District Attorney." That gentleman eyed the familiarity between his witness and the prisoner with manifest disgust, and indicated to the court that he was done. "Then you didn't feel frightened, Mr. Kirby?" said the counsel for the prisoner. "Me? No," said Billy, casting his eyes over his own huge frame with evident self-satisfaction. "I'm not to be scared so easy. You look like a hardy man."
"Where were you born, sir?" "Vermont State. 'Tis a mountainous place, but there's a stiff soil, and it's pretty much wooded with beech and maple."
"I have always heard so," said Mr. Lippet soothingly. "You have been used to the rifle yourself in that country." "I pull the second best trigger in this county. I knock under to Natty Bumppo, there sin he shot the pigeon." Leatherstocking raised his head and laughed again, when he abruptly thrust out a wrinkled hand, and said, "You're young yet, Billy,
"And haven't seen the matches that I have. But here's my hand. I bear no malice to you."
"I don't." Mr. Lippet allowed this conciliatory offering to be accepted, and judiciously paused, while the spirit of peace was exercising its influence over the two, but the judge interposed his authority. "This is an improper place for such dialogues," he said. "Proceed with your examination of this witness, Mr. Lippet, or I shall order the next." The attorney started, as if unconscious of any impropriety, and continued, "So you settled the matter with Natty amicably on the spot, did you?" "He gin me the skin, and I didn't want to quarrel with an old man. For my part, I see no such mighty matter in shooting a buck." "And you parted friends? And you would never have thought of bringing the business up before a court, hadn't you been subpoenaed?" "I don't think I should. He gin the skin, and I didn't feel a hard thought, though Squire Doolittle got some affronted." "I have done, sir," said Mr. Lippet, probably relying on the charge of the judge, as he again seated himself, with the air of a man who felt that his success was certain. When Mr. Vanderschool arose to address the jury, he commenced by saying, "Gentlemen of the jury, I should have interrupted the leading questions put by the prisoner's counsel. By leading questions, I mean telling him what to say. Did I not feel confident that the law of the land was superior to any advantages, I mean legal advantages, which he might obtain by his art. The counsel for the prisoner, gentlemen, has endeavored to persuade you, in opposition to your own good sense, to believe that pointing a rifle at a constable, elected or deputed, is a very innocent affair, and that society, I mean the Commonwealth, gentlemen, shall not be endangered thereby. But let me claim your attention while we look over the particulars of this heinous offence." Here Mr. Van der School favored the jury with an abridgment of the testimony, recounted in such a manner as utterly to confuse the faculties of his worthy listeners. After this exhibition he closed as follows: "And now, gentlemen, having thus made plain to your senses the crime of which this unfortunate man has been guilty, unfortunate both on account of his ignorance and his guilt, I shall leave you to your own consciences, not in the least doubting that you will see the importance, notwithstanding the prisoner's counsel, doubtless relying on your former verdict, wishes to appear so confident of success, of punishing the offender, and asserting the dignity of the laws." It was now the duty of the judge to deliver his charge. It consisted of a short comprehensive summary of the testimony, laying bare the artifice of the prisoner's counsel, and placing the facts in so obvious a light that they could not well be misunderstood. "Living as we do, gentlemen," he concluded, "on the skirts of society, it becomes doubly necessary to protect the ministers of the law. If you believe the witnesses in their construction of the acts of the prisoner, it is your duty to convict him. But if you believe that the old man who this day appears before you meant not to harm the constable, but was acting more under the influence of habit than by the instigations of malice, it will be your duty to judge him, but to do it with lenity." As before, the jury did not leave their box, but after a consultation of some little time, their foreman arose and pronounced the prisoner guilty. There was but little surprise manifested in the court-room at this verdict, as the testimony, the greater part of which we have omitted, was too clear and direct to be passed over. The judges seem to have anticipated this sentiment, for a consultation was passing among them also, during the deliberation of the jury, and the preparatory movements of the bench announced the coming sentence. "Nathaniel Bumppo," commenced the judge, making the customary pause. The old hunter, who had been musing again with his head on the bar, raised himself and cried with a prompt military tone, "Here!" The judge waved his hand for silence and proceeded. "In forming their sentence, the court have been governed as much by the consideration of your ignorance of the laws as by a strict sense of the importance of punishing such outrages as this of which you have been found guilty. They have therefore passed over the obvious punishment of whipping on the bare back, in mercy to your years. But as the dignity of the law requires an open exhibition of the consequences of your crime, it is ordered that you be conveyed from this room to the public stocks, where you are to be confined for 1 hour, that you pay a fine to the state of $100, and that you be imprisoned in the jail of this county for 1 calendar month, and furthermore, that your imprisonment do not cease until the said fine shall be paid. I feel it my duty, Nathaniel Bumppo—" "And where should I get the money?" interrupted the Leatherstocking eagerly. "Where should I get the money? You'll take away the bounty on the painters, because I cut the throat of a deer. And how is an old man to find so much gold or silver in the woods? No, no, Judge. Think better of it, and don't talk of shutting me up in a jail for the little time I have to stay. If you have anything to urge against the passing of the sentence, the court will yet hear you," said the judge mildly. "I have enough to say agin it," cried Natty, grasping the bar on which his fingers were working with a convulsed motion. "Where am I to get the money? Let me out into the woods and hills, where I've been used to breathe the clear air, and though I'm 10, if you've left game enough in the country, I'll travel night and day, but I'll make you up the sum afore the season is over." Yes, yes, you see the reason of the thing, and the wickedness of shutting up an old man, that has spent his days, as one may say, where he could always look into the windows of heaven. "I must be governed by the law—" "Talk not to me of law, Marmaduke Temple," interrupted the hunter. "Did the beast of the forest mind your laws, when it was thirsty and hungering for the blood of your own child? She was kneeling to her God for a greater favor than I ask, and he heard her. And if you now say no to my prayers, do you think he will be deaf? My private feelings must not enter into—" "Hear me, Marmaduke Temple," interrupted the old man with melancholy earnestness, "and hear reason. I've travelled these mountains when you was no judge, but an infant in your mother's arms.
And I feel as if I had a right and a privilege to travel them again afore I die."
Have you forgot the time that you come on to the lake shore, when there wasn't even a jail to lodge in? And didn't I give you my own bearskin to sleep on, and the fat of a noble buck to satisfy the cravings of your hunger? Yes, yes, you thought it no sin then to kill a deer, and this I did, though I had no reason to love you, for you had never done anything but harm to them that loved and sheltered me. And now will you shut me up in your dungeons, to pay me for my kindness? $100! Where should I get the money? No, no. There's them that says hard things of you, Marmaduke Temple, but you ain't so bad as to wish to see an old man die in a prison, because he stood up for the right. Come, friend, let me pass. It's long sin I've been used to such crowds, and I crave to be in the woods again. Don't fear me, Judge. I bid you not to fear me, for if there's beaver enough left on the streams, or the buckskins will sell for a shilling apiece, you shall have the last penny of the fine. Where are you, pups? Come away, dogs, come away. We have a grievous toil to do for our years, but it shall be done. Yes, yes, I promised it, and it shall be done." It is unnecessary to say that the movement of the Leatherstocking was again intercepted by the constable, but before he had time to speak, a bustling in the crowd and a loud hem drew all eyes to another part of the room. Benjamin had succeeded in edging his way through the people, and was now seen balancing his short body, with one foot in a window and the other on a railing of the jury box. To the amazement of the whole court, the steward was evidently preparing to speak. After a good deal of difficulty, he succeeded in drawing from his pocket a small bag, and then found utterance. "If so be," he said, "that your honor is agreeable to trust the poor fellow out on another cruise among the beasts, here's a small matter that will help to bring down the risks, seeing that there's just 35 of your Spaniards in it. And I wish from the bottom of my heart that they was real British guineas, for the sake of the old boy. But 'tis as it is, and if Squire Dickens will just be so good as to overhaul this small bit of an account, and take enough from the bag to settle the same, he's welcome to hold on upon the rest until such a time as the Leatherstocking can grapple with them said beaver, or for that matter forever, and no thanks asked." As Benjamin concluded, he thrust out the wooden register of his arrears to the bold dragoon with one hand, while he offered his bag of dollars with the other. Astonishment at this singular interruption produced a profound stillness in the room, which was only interrupted by the sheriff, who struck his sword on the table and cried, "Silence!" "There must be an end to this," said the judge, struggling to overcome his feelings. "Constable, lead the prisoner to the stocks. Mr. Clerk, what stands next on the calendar?" Natty seemed to yield to his destiny, for he sank his head on his chest, and followed the officer from the court room in silence. The crowd moved back for the passage of the prisoner, and when his tall form was seen descending from the outer door, a rush of the people to the scene of his disgrace followed. Chapter 33. Recording by Bill Borst. Chapter 34. Of the Pioneers, or the Sources of the Susquehanna, a Descriptive Tale, by James Fenimore Cooper. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Chapter 34. "Ha ha! Look, he wears cruel garters." Lear. The punishments of the common law were still known, at the time of our tale, to the people of New York, and the whipping post and its companion, the stocks, were not yet supplanted by the more merciful expedients of the public prison. Immediately in front of the jail those relics of the older times were situated as a lesson of precautionary justice to the evil-doers of the settlement. Natty followed the constables to this spot, bowing his head in submission to a power that he was unable to oppose, and surrounded by the crowd that formed a circle about his person, exhibiting in their countenances strong curiosity. A constable raised the upper part of the stocks, and pointed with his finger to the holes where the old man was to place his feet. Without making the least objection to the punishment, the Leatherstocking quietly seated himself on the ground, and suffered his limbs to be laid in the openings, without even a murmur, though he cast one glance about him, in quest of that sympathy that human nature always seems to require under suffering, but he met no direct manifestations of pity. Neither did he see any unfeeling exultation, or hear a single reproachful epithet. The character of the mob, if it could be called by such a name, was that of attentive subordination. The constable was in the act of lowering the upper plank, when Benjamin, who had pressed close to the side of the prisoner, said in his hoarse tone, as if seeking for some cause to create a quarrel, "Where away, Master Constable, is the use of clapping a man in them there bilboes? It neither stops his grog nor hurts his back. What for is it that you do the thing?" "'Tis the sentence of the court, Mr. Penguillium, and there's law for it, I suppose." "Ay, I know that there's law for the thing, but where away do you find the use, I say? It does no harm, and it only keeps a man by the heels for the small matter of 2 glasses." "Is it no harm, Benny Pump?" said Natty, raising his eyes with a piteous look in the face of the steward. "Is it no harm to show off a man in his 71st year, like a tame bear, for the settlers to look on? Is it no harm to put an old soldier that has served through the war of '56, and seen the enemy in the '76 business, into a place like this, where the boys can point at him and say, I have known the time when he was a spectacle for the county? Is it no harm to bring down the pride of an honest man to the equal of the beasts of the forest?" Benjamin stared about him fiercely, and could he have found a single face that expressed contumely, he would have been prompt to quarrel with its owner. But meeting everywhere with looks of sobriety, and occasionally of commiseration, he very deliberately seated himself by the side of the hunter, and, placing his legs in the 2 vacant holes of the stocks, he said, "Now lower away, Master Constable, lower away, I tell ye. If so be there's such a thing hereabouts as a man that wants to see a bear, let him look and be damned, and he shall find 2 of them, and mayhap one of the same that can bite as well as growl." "But I have no orders to put you in the stocks, Mr. Pump," cried the constable. "You must get up and let me do my duty." "You've my orders, and what do you need better to meddle with my own feet? So lower away, will ye, and let me see the man that chooses to open his mouth with a grin on it." "There can't be any harm in locking up a creature that will enter the pound," said the constable, laughing, and closing the stocks on them both. It was fortunate that this act was executed with decision, for the whole of the spectators, when they saw Benjamin assume the position he took, felt an inclination for merriment, which few thought it worth while to suppress. The steward struggled violently for his liberty again, with an evident intention of making battle on those who stood nearest to him, but the key was already turned, and all his efforts were vain. "Hark ye, Master Constable," he cried, "just clear away your bilboes for the small matter of a log glass, will ye, and let me show some of them there chaps who it is they are so merry about." No, you would go in, and you can't come out," returned the officer, "until the time has expired that the judge directed for the keeping of the prisoner." Benjamin, finding that his threats and his struggles were useless, had good sense enough to learn patience from the resigned manner of his companion, and soon settled himself down by the side of Natty, with a contemptuousness expressed in his hard features, that showed he had substituted disgust for rage. When the violence of the steward's feelings had in some measure subsided, he turned to his fellow sufferer, and, with a motive that might have vindicated a worse effusion, he attempted the charitable office of consolation. "Taking it by and large, Master Bumppo, it's but a small matter after all," he said. "Now, I've known very good sort of men aboard of the Boadishey, laid by the heels, for nothing, mayhap, but forgetting that they'd drunk their allowance already, when a glass of grog has come in their way. This is nothing more than riding with 2 anchors ahead, waiting for a turn in the tide, or a shift of wind, d'ye see, with a soft bottom and plenty of room for the sweep of your hawse. Now, I've seen many a man, for overshooting his reckoning, as I told ye, moored head and starn, where he couldn't so much as heave his broadside round, and mayhap a stopper clapped on his tongue too, in the shape of a pump bolt lashed athwartship his jaws, all the same as an outrigger along the side of a taffrail rail." The hunter appeared to appreciate the kind intentions of the other, though he could not understand his eloquence, and raising his humbled countenance he attempted a smile, as he said, "Anan." "'Tis nothing, I say, but a small matter of a squall that will soon blow over," continued Benjamin. "To you that has such a length of keel it must be all the same as nothing, though, seeing that I am little short in my lower timbers, they've triced my heels up in such a way as to give me a bit of a cant. But what cares I, Master Bumppo, if the ship strains a little at her anchor? It's only for a dog watch, and damn me but she'll sail with you then on that cruise after them said beaver. I'm not much used to small arms, seeing that I was stationed at the ammunition boxes, being somewhat too low rigged to see over the hammock cloths. But I can carry the game, d'ye see, and mayhap make out to lend a hand with the traps. And if so be you're any way so handy with them as ye be with your boat hook, 'twill be but a short cruise after all. I've squared the yards with Squire Dickens this morning, and I shall send him word that he needn't bear my name on the books again till such time as the cruise is over." "You're used to dwell with men, Benny," said Leatherstocking mournfully, "and the ways of the woods would be hard on you, if—" "Not a bit, not a bit," cried the steward. "I'm none of your fair-weather chaps, Master Bumppo, as sails only in smooth water. When I find a friend, I sticks by him, d'ye see? Now there's no better man a-going than Squire Dickens, and I love him about the same as I loves Mistress Hollister's new keg of Jamaiky." The steward paused, and turning his uncouth visage on the hunter, he surveyed him with a roguish leer of his eye, and gradually suffered the muscles of his hard features to relax, until his face was illuminated by the display of his white teeth, when he dropped his voice and added, "I say, Master Leatherstocking, 'tis fresher and livelier than any Hollands you'll get in Garnsey, but we'll send a hand over and ask the woman for a taste, for I'm so jammed in these here bilboes that I begin to want summat to lighten my upper works." Natty sighed and gazed about him on the crowd that already began to disperse, and which had now diminished greatly as its members scattered in their various pursuits. He looked wistfully at Benjamin, but did not reply, a deeply seated anxiety seeming to absorb every other sensation, and to throw a melancholy gloom over his wrinkled features, which were working with the movements of his mind. The steward was about to act on the old principle that silence gives consent, when Hiram Doolittle, attended by Jotham, stalked out of the crowd across the open space and approached the stocks. The magistrate passed by the end where Benjamin was seated, and posted himself at a safe distance from the steward, in front of the Leatherstocking. Hiram stood for a moment, cowering before the keen looks that Natty fastened on him, and suffering under an embarrassment that was quite new, when, having in some degree recovered himself, he looked at the heavens, and then at the smoky atmosphere, as if it were only an ordinary meeting with a friend, and said in his formal, hesitating way, "Quite a scarcity of rain lately. I some think we shall have a long drought on it." Benjamin was occupied in untying his bag of dollars, and did not observe the approach of the magistrate, while Natty turned his face, in which every muscle was working, away from him in disgust, without answering. Rather encouraged than daunted by this exhibition of dislike, Hiram, after a short pause, continued, "The clouds look as if they'd no water in them, and the earth is dreadfully parched. To my judgment there'll be short crops this season, if the rain doesn't fall quite speedily." The air with which Mr. Doolittle delivered this prophetical opinion was peculiar to his species, It was a Jesuitical, cold, unfeeling, and selfish manner that seemed to say, "I have kept within the law," to the man he had so cruelly injured. It quite overcame the restraint that the old hunter had been laboring to impose on himself, and he burst out in a warm glow of indignation. "Why should the rain fall from the clouds," he cried, "when you force the tears from the eyes of the old, the sick, and the poor? Away with ye! Away with ye! You may be formed in the image of the Maker, but Satan dwells in your heart. Away with ye, I say. I am mournful, and the sight of ye brings bitter thoughts." Benjamin ceased thumbing his money, and raised his head at the instant that Hiram, who was thrown off his guard by the invectives of the hunter, unluckily trusted his person within reach of the steward, who grasped one of his legs with a hand that had the grip of a vice, and whirled the magistrate from his feet, before he had either time to collect his senses or to exercise the strength he did really possess. Benjamin wanted neither proportions nor manhood in his head, shoulders, and arms, though all the rest of his frame appeared to be originally intended for a very different sort of a man. He exerted his physical powers on the present occasion with much discretion, and, as he had taken his antagonist at a great disadvantage, the struggle resulted very soon in Benjamin getting the magistrate fixed in a posture somewhat similar to his own, and manfully placed face to face. "You're a ship's cousin, I tell ye, Master Do-but-little," roared the steward. "Some such matter as a ship's cousin, sir. I know you, I do, with your fair-weather speeches to Squire Dickens, to his face, and then you go and sarve out your grumbling to all the old women in the town, do ye? Ain't it enough for any Christian, let him harbor never so much malice, to get an honest old fellow laid by the heels in this fashion, without carrying sail so hard on the poor dog, as if you would run him down as he lay at his anchors? But I've logged many a hard thing against your name, master, and now the time's come to foot up the day's work, d'ye see? So square yourself, you lubber, square yourself, and we'll soon know who's the better man." "Jotham!" cried the frightened magistrate, "Jotham, call in the constables. Mr. Penguillium, I command the peace. I order you to keep the peace." "There's been more peace than love atwixt us, master," cried the steward, making some very unequivocal demonstrations toward hostility. "So mind yourself, square yourself, I say. Do you smell this here bit of a sledge-hammer?" "Lay hands on me if you dare!" exclaimed Hiram, as well as he could, under the grasp which the steward held on his throttle. "Lay hands on me if you dare!" "If you call this laying, master, you are welcome to the eggs," roared the steward. It becomes our disagreeable duty to record here that the acts of Benjamin now became violent, for he darted his sledge-hammer violently on the amble of Mr. Doolittle's countenance, and the place became in an instant a scene of tumult and confusion. The crowd rushed in a dense circle around the spot, while some ran to the court-room to give the alarm, and one or two of the more juvenile part of the multitude had a desperate trial of speed to see who should be the happy man to communicate the critical situation of the magistrate to his wife. Benjamin worked away, with great industry and a good deal of skill at his occupation, using one hand to raise up his antagonist, while he knocked him over with the other; for he would have been disgraced in his own estimation had he struck a blow on a fallen adversary. By this considerate arrangement he had found means to hammer the visage of Hiram out of all shape, by the time Richard succeeded in forcing his way through the throng to the point of combat. The sheriff afterward declared that, independently of his mortification as preserver of the peace of the county, at this interruption to its harmony, he was never so grieved in his life as when he saw this breach of unity between his favorites. Hiram had in some degree become necessary to his vanity, and Benjamin, strange as it may appear, he really loved. This attachment was exhibited in the first words that he uttered. "Squire Doolittle, Squire Doolittle, I am ashamed to see a man of your character and office forget himself so much as to disturb the peace, insult the court, and beat poor Benjamin in this manner." At the sound of Mr. Jones' voice, the steward ceased his employment, and Hiram had an opportunity of raising his discomfited visage toward the mediator. Emboldened by the sight of the sheriff, Mr. Doolittle again had recourse to his lungs. "I'll have law on you for this," he cried desperately. "I'll have the law on you for this. I call on you, Mr. Sheriff, to seize this man, and I demand that you take his body into custody." By this time Richard was master of the true state of the case, and turning to the steward, he said reproachfully, "Benjamin, how came you in the stocks? I always thought you were mild and docile as a lamb. It was for your docility that I most esteemed you. Benjamin, Benjamin, you have not only disgraced yourself, but your friends, by this shameless conduct. Bless me, bless me, Mr. Doolittle, he seems to have knocked your face all of one side." Hiram by this time had got on his feet again, and without the reach of the steward, when he broke forth in violent appeals for vengeance. The offence was too apparent to be passed over, and the sheriff, mindful of the impartiality exhibited by his cousin in the recent trial of the Leatherstocking, came to the painful conclusion that it was necessary to commit his major domo to prison. As the time of Natty's punishment was expired, and Benjamin found that they were to be confined, for that night at least, in the same apartment, he made no very strong objection to the measure, nor spoke of bail, though, as the sheriff preceded the party of constables that conducted them to the jail, he uttered the following remonstrance: "As to being berthed with Master Bumppo for a night or so, it's but little I think of it, Squire Dickens, seeing that I calls him an honest man, and one as has a handy way with boat hooks and rifles. But as for owning that a man desarves anything worse than a double allowance, for knocking that carpenter's face a one side, as you call it, I'll maintain it's ag'in reason and Christianity. If there's a bloodsucker in this 'ere country, it's that very chap. Ay, I know him, and if he hasn't got all the same as dead wood in his head works, he knows summat of me. Where's the mighty harm, Squire, that you take it so much to heart? It's all the same as any other battle, d'ye see, sir, being broadside to broadside, only that it was foot at anchor, which was what we did in Port Pray a Roads, when suffering came in among us, and a suffering time he had of it before he got out again." Richard thought it unworthy of him to make any reply to this speech, but when his prisoners were safely lodged in an outer dungeon, ordering the bolts to be drawn and the key turned, he withdrew. Benjamin held frequent and friendly dialogues with different people through the iron gratings, during the afternoon, but his companion paced their narrow limits, in his moccasins, with quick, impatient treads, his face hanging on his breast in dejection, or when lifted, at moments, to the idlers at the window, lighted perhaps for an instant with the childish aspect of aged forgetfulness, which would vanish directly in an expression of deep and obvious anxiety. At the close of the day, Edwards was seen at the window, in earnest dialogue with his friend, and after he departed it was thought that he had communicated words of comfort to the hunter, who threw himself on his pallet and was soon in a deep sleep. The curious spectators had exhausted the conversation of the steward, who had drunk good fellowship with half of his acquaintance, and, as Natty was no longer in motion, by 8 o'clock, Billy Kirby, who was the last lounger at the window, retired into the Templeton coffee-house, when Natty rose and hung a blanket before the opening, and the prisoners apparently retired for the night. End of chapter 34. Recording by Bill Borst. Chapter 35 of the Pioneers, or the Sources of the Susquehanna, a Descriptive Tale by James Fenimore Cooper. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information, or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Chapter 35. And to avoid the foe's pursuit, with spurring put their cattle to it, until all four were out of wind, and danger too, near looked behind. Hudibras. As the shades of evening approached, the jurors, witnesses, and other attendants on the court began to disperse, and before 9 o'clock the village was quiet, and its streets nearly deserted. At that hour Judge Temple and his daughter, followed at a short distance by Louisa Grant, walked slowly down the avenue, under the slight shadows of the young poplars, holding the following discourse. "You can best soothe his wounded spirit, my child," said Marmaduke, "but it will be dangerous to touch on the nature of his offence.
the sanctity of the laws must be respected." "Surely, sir," cried the impatient Elizabeth, "those laws that condemn a man like the Leatherstocking to so severe a punishment, for an offence that even I must think very venial, cannot be perfect in themselves." "Thou talkest of what thou dost not understand, Elizabeth," returned her father. "Society cannot exist without wholesome restraints. Those restraints cannot be inflicted without security and respect to the persons of those who administer them, and it would sound ill indeed to report that a judge had extended favor to a convicted criminal, because he had saved the life of his child." I see the difficulty of your situation, dear sir," cried the daughter; "but in appreciating the offence of poor Natty, I cannot separate the minister of the law from the man." "There thou talkest as a woman, child. It is not for an assault on Hiram Doolittle, but for threatening the life of a constable, who was in the performance of—" "It is immaterial whether it be one or the other," interrupted Miss Temple, with a logic that contained more feeling than reason. "I know Natty to be innocent, and thinking so I must think all wrong who oppress him." "His judge among the number, thy father, Elizabeth?" "Nay, nay, nay, do not put such questions to me. Give me my commission, father, and let me proceed to execute it." The judge paused a moment, smiling fondly on his child, and then dropped his hand affectionately on her shoulder, as he answered: "Thou hast reason, Bess, and much of it, too, but thy heart lies too near thy head. But listen. In this pocketbook are $200. Go to the prison. There are none in this place to harm thee. Give this note to the jailer, and when thou seest Bumppo, say what thou wilt to the poor old man. Give scope to the feeling of thy warm heart. But try to remember, Elizabeth, that the laws alone remove us from the condition of the savages; that he has been criminal, and that his judge was thy father." Miss Temple made no reply, but she pressed the hand that held the pocketbook to her bosom, and taking her friend by the arm, they issued together from the inclosure into the principal street of the village. As they pursued their walk in silence, under the row of houses, where the deeper gloom of the evening effectually concealed their persons, no sound reached them, excepting the slow tread of a yoke of oxen, with the rattling of a cart, that were moving along the street in the same direction with themselves. The figure of the teamster was just discernible by the dim light, lounging by the side of his cattle with a listless air, as if fatigued by the toil of the day. At the corner, where the jail stood, the progress of the ladies was impeded, for a moment, by the oxen, who turned up to the side of the building, and, given a lock of hay, which they had carried on their necks as a reward for their patient labor, the whole of this was so natural, and so common, that Elizabeth saw nothing to induce a second glance at the team, until she heard the teamster speaking to his cattle in a low voice. "Mind yourself, Brindle, will you, sir, will you?" The language itself was so unusual to oxen, with which all who dwell in a new country are familiar, but there was something in the voice, also, that startled Miss Temple. On turning the corner, she necessarily approached the man, and her look was enabled to detect the person of Oliver Edwards, concealed under the coarse garb of a teamster. Their eyes met at the same instant, and, notwithstanding the gloom, and the enveloping cloak of Elizabeth, the recognition was mutual. "Miss Temple! Mr. Edwards!" were exclaimed simultaneously, though a feeling that seemed common to both rendered the words nearly inaudible. "Is it possible?" exclaimed Edwards, after the moment of doubt had passed. "Do I see you so nigh the jail? But you are going to the rectory. I beg pardon, Miss Grant, I believe. I did not recognize you at first." The sigh which Louisa tittered was so faint that it was only heard by Elizabeth, who replied quickly: "We are going not only to the jail, Mr. Edwards, but into it. We wish to show the Leatherstocking that we do not forget his services, and that at the same time we must be just, we are also grateful. I suppose you are on a similar errand, but let me beg that you will give us leave to precede you 10 minutes. Good night, sir. I am quite sorry, Mr. Edwards, to see you reduced to such labor. I am sure my father would—" "I shall await your pleasure, madam," interrupted the youth coldly.
May I beg that you will not mention my being here?" "Certainly," said Elizabeth, returning his bow by a slight inclination of her head, and urging the tardy Louisa forward. As they entered the jailer's house, however, Miss Grant found leisure to whisper, "Would it not be well to offer part of your money to Oliver? Half of it will pay the fine of Bumppo, and he is so unused to hardships. I am sure my father will subscribe much of his little pittance, to place him in a station that is more worthy of him." The involuntary smile that passed over the features of Elizabeth was blended with an expression of deep and heartfelt pity. She did not reply, however, and the appearance of the jailer soon recalled the thoughts of both to the object of their visit. The rescue of the ladies, and their consequent interest in his prisoner, together with the informal manners that prevailed in the country, all united to prevent any surprise on the part of the jailer, at their request for admission to Bumppo. The note of Judge Temple, however, would have silenced all objections, if he had felt them, and he led the way without hesitation to the apartment that held the prisoners. The instant the key was put into the lock, the hoarse voice of Benjamin was heard demanding, "Yo-hoy! Who comes there?" "Some visitors that you'll be glad to see," returned the jailer. "What have you done to the lock, that it won't turn?" "Handsomely, handsomely, master," cried the steward. "I have just drove a nail into a berth alongside of this here bolt, as a stopper, d'ye see, so that Master Do-but-little can't be running in and breezing up another fight atwixt us. For to my account, there'll be but a hanyam with me soon, seeing that they'll mulct me of my Spaniards, all the same as if I'd overflogged the lubber. Throw your ship into the wind, and lay by for a small matter, will ye? And I'll soon clear a passage." The sounds of hammering gave an assurance that the steward was in earnest, and in a short time the lock yielded, when the door was opened. Benjamin had evidently been anticipating the seizure of his money, for he had made frequent demands on the favorite cask at the Bold Dragoon, during the afternoon and evening, and was now in that state which by marine imagery is called half-seas over. It was no easy thing to destroy the balance of the old tar by the effects of liquor, for, as he expressed it himself, he was too low rigged not to carry sail in all weathers. But he was precisely in that condition which is so expressively termed muddy. When he perceived who the visitors were, he retreated to the side of the room where his pallet lay, and, regardless of the presence of his young mistress, seated himself on it with an air of great sobriety, placing his back firmly against the wall. "If you undertake to spoil my locks in this manner, Mr. Pump," said the jailer, "I shall put a stopper, as you call it, on your legs, and tie you down to your bed." "What for should you, master?" grumbled Benjamin. "I've rode out but one squall to day anchored by the heels, and I wants no more of them. Where's the harm of doing all the same as yourself? Leave that there door free outboard, and you'll find no locking inboard, I'll promise you." "I must shut up for the night at 9," said the jailer, "and it's now 42 minutes past 8. He placed the little candle on a rough pine table, and withdrew. "Leatherstocking," said Elizabeth, when the key of the door was turned on them again, "my good friend Leatherstocking, I have come on a message of gratitude. Had you submitted to the search, worthy old man, the death of the deer would have been a trifle, and all would have been well—" "Submit to the sarch!" interrupted Natty, raising his face from resting on his knees, without rising from the corner where he had seated himself. "D'ye think, gal, I would let such a varmint into my hut? No, no, I wouldn't have opened the door to your own sweet countenance then. But they are welcome to search among the coals and ashes now. They'll find only some such heap as is to be seen at every pot-ashery in the mountains." The old man dropped his face again on one hand, and seemed to be lost in melancholy. "The hut can be rebuilt, and made better than before," returned Miss Temple, "and it shall be my office to see it done, when your imprisonment is ended." "Can ye raise the dead, child?" said Natty, in a sorrowful voice. "Can ye go into the place where you've laid your fathers and mothers and children, and gather together their ashes, and make the same men and women of them as afore?
You do not know what 'tis to lay your head for more than 40 years under the cover of the same logs, and to look at the same things for the better part of a man's life. You are young yet, child, but you are one of the most precious of God's creatures. I had hoped for you that it might come to pass, but it's all over now. This, put to that, will drive the thing quite out of his mind forever." Miss Temple must have understood the meaning of the old man better than the other listeners, for while Louisa stood innocently by her side, commiserating the griefs of the hunter, she bent her head aside so as to conceal her features. The action and the feeling that caused it lasted but a moment. "Other logs, and better, though, can be had, and shall be found for you, my old defender," she continued. "Your confinement will soon be over, and before that time arrives I shall have a house prepared for you, where you may spend the close of your long and harmless life in ease and plenty." "Ease and plenty! House!" repeated Natty, slowly. "You mean well, and I quite mourn that it cannot be. But he has seen me a sight and a laughing stock for—" "Damn your stock!" said Benjamin, flourishing his bottle with one hand, from which he had been taking hasty and repeated draughts, while he made gestures of disdain with the other. "Who cares for his bilboes? There's a leg that's been stuck up on end like a jibboom for an hour, d'ye see? And what's it the worse for, ha? Canst tell me, what's it the worser, ha?" "I believe you forget, Mr. Pump, in whose presence you are," said Elizabeth. "Forget you, Miss Lizzy?" returned the steward. "If I do, damn me, you're not to be forgot. Like Goody Prettybones up at the big house there. I say, old Sharpshooter, she may have pretty bones, but I can't say so much for her flesh, d'ye see, for she looks somewhat like an atomy with another man's jacket on. Now for the skin of her face, it's all the same as a new topsail with taut boat rope, being snug at the leeches, but all in a bite about the inner cloths."
"Peace! I command you to be silent, sir," said Elizabeth.
"Ay, ay, ma'am," returned the steward. "You didn't say I shouldn't drink, though."
"We will not speak of what is to become of others," said Miss Temple, turning again to the hunter, "but of your own fortunes, Natty. It shall be my care to see that you pass the rest of your days in ease and plenty." "Ease and plenty!" again repeated the Leatherstocking. "What ease can there be to an old man, who must walk a mile across the open fields before he can find a shade to hide him from a scorching sun? Or what plenty is there where you hunt a day and not start a buck, or see anything bigger than a mink, or maybe a stray fox? Ah! I shall have a hard time after them very beavers for this fine. I must go low toward the Pennsylvania line in search of the creatures, maybe 100 mile, for they're not to be got hereaway. No, no, your betterments and clearings have druv the knowing things out of the country, and instead of beaver dams, which is the natur' of the animal, and according to Providence, you turn back the waters over the low grounds with your mill dams, as if 'twas in man to stay the drops from going where he wills them to go. Benny, unless you stop your hand from going so often to your mouth, you won't be ready to start when the time comes." "Harkee, Master Bumppo," said the steward, "don't you fear for Ben. When the watch is called, set me of my legs and give me the bearings and the distance of where you want me to steer, and I'll carry sail with the best of you, I will." "The time has come now," said the hunter, listening. "I hear the horns of the oxens rubbing agin the side of the jail." "Well, say the word, and then heave ahead, shipmate," said Benjamin. "You won't betray us, gal?" said Natty, looking simply into the face of Elizabeth. "You won't betray an old man, who craves to breathe the clear air of heaven? I mean no harm, and if the law says that I must pay the $100, I'll take the season through, but it shall be forthcoming, and this good man will help me." "You catch them," said Benjamin, with a sweeping gesture of his arm, "and if they get away again, call me a slink, that's all." "But what mean you?" cried the wondering Elizabeth. Here you must stay for 30 days, but I have the money for your fine in this purse. Take it, pay it in the morning, and summon patience for your month. I will come often to see you with my friend. We will make up your clothes with our own hands. Indeed, indeed, you shall be comfortable." "Would ye, children?" said Natty, advancing across the floor with an air of kindness, and taking the hand of Elizabeth. "Would ye be so careful of an old man, and just for shooting a beast which cost him nothing? Such things doesn't run in the blood, I believe, for you seem not to forget a favor. Your little fingers couldn't do much on a buckskin, nor be you used to push such a thread as sinews. But if he hasn't got past hearing, he shalt hear it and know it, that he may see, like me, there is some who know how to remember a kindness." "Tell him nothing," cried Elizabeth earnestly. "If you love me, if you regard my feelings, tell him nothing. It is of yourself only I would talk, and for yourself only I act. I grieve, Leatherstocking, that the law requires that you should be detained here so long. But, after all, it will be only a short month, and—" "A month!" exclaimed Natty, opening his mouth with his usual laugh. "Not a day, nor a night, nor an hour, gal. Judge Temple may sentence, but he can't keep without a better dungeon than this. I was taken once by the French, and they put 62 of us in a blockhouse, nigh hand to old Frontenac, but 'twas easy to cut through a pine log to them that was used to timber." The hunter paused, and looked cautiously around the room, when, laughing again, he shoved the steward gently from his post, and, removing the bedclothes, discovered a hole recently cut in the logs with a mallet and chisel. "It's only a kick, and the outside piece is off, and then—" "Off! Ay, off!" cried Benjamin, rising from his stupor. "Well, here's off. Ay, ay, you catch 'em, and I'll hold on to them said beaver hats." "I fear this lad will trouble me much," said Natty. "'Twill be a hard pull for the mountain, should they take the scent soon, and he is not in a state of mind to run." "Run!" echoed the steward. "No, sheer alongside, and let's have a fight of it." "Peace!" ordered Elizabeth. "Ay, ay, ma'am." "You will not leave us, surely, Leatherstocking," continued Miss Temple. "I beseech you, reflect that you will be driven to the woods entirely, and that you are fast getting old. Be patient for a little time, when you can go abroad openly, and with honor. Is there beaver to be catched here, gal? If not, here is money to discharge the fine, and in a month you are free. See, here it is in gold." "Gold!" said Natty, with a kind of childish curiosity. "It's long sin' I seen a gold piece. We used to get the broad joes, in the old war, as plenty as the bears be now. I remember there was a man in Dieskau's army that was killed, who had a dozen of the shining things sewed up in his shirt. I didn't handle them myself, but I seen them cut out with my own eyes. They was bigger and brighter than them be." "These are English guineas, and are yours," said Elizabeth, "an earnest of what shall be done for you." "Me! Why should you give me this treasure?" said Natty, looking earnestly at the maiden. "Why? Have you not saved my life? Did you not rescue me from the jaws of the beast?" exclaimed Elizabeth, veiling her eyes as if to hide some hideous object from her view. The hunter took the money, and continued turning it in his hand for some time, piece by piece, talking aloud during the operation. "There's a rifle, they say, out on the Cherry Valley, that will carry 100 rods and kill. I've seen good guns in my day, but none quite equal to that. 100 rods with any sartainty is great shooting. Well, well, I'm old, and the gun I have will answer my time. Here, child, take back your gold. But the hour has come. I hear him talking to the cattle, and I must be going. You won't tell of us, gal? You won't tell of us, will you?" "Tell of you!" echoed Elizabeth. "But take the money, old man. Take the money, even if you go into the mountains." "No, no," said Natty, shaking his head kindly. "I would not rob you so for 20 rifles. But there's one thing you can do for me, if you will.
that no other is at hand to do." "Name it, name it." "Why, it's only to buy a canister of powder. 'Twill cost 2 silver dollars. Benny Pump has the money ready, but we daren't come into the town to get it. Nobody has it but the Frenchman. 'Tis of the best, and just suits a rifle. Will you get it for me, gal? Say, will you get it for me?" "Will I? I will bring it to you, Leatherstocking, though I toil a day in quest of you through the woods. But where shall I find you, and how?" "Where?" said Natty, musing a moment. "To-morrow on the Vision. On the very top of the Vision I'll meet you, child, just as the sun gets over our heads. See that it's the fine grain. You'll know it by the gloss and the price." "I will do it," said Elizabeth firmly. Natty now seated himself, and placing his feet in the hole, with a slight effort he opened a passage through into the street. The ladies heard the rustling of hay, and well understood the reason why Edwards was in the capacity of a teamster. "Come, Benny," said the hunter. "'Twill be no darker to night, for the moon will rise in an hour." "Stay," exclaimed Elizabeth. "It should not be said that you escaped in the presence of the daughter of Judge Temple. Return, Leatherstocking, and let us retire before you execute your plan." Natty was about to reply, when the approaching footsteps of the jailer announced the necessity of his immediate return. He had barely time to regain his feet, and to conceal the hole with the bedclothes, across which Benjamin very opportunely fell, before the key was turned, and the door of the apartment opened. "Isn't Miss Temple ready to go?" said the civil jailer. "It's the usual hour for locking up." "I follow you, sir," returned Elizabeth. "Good night, Leatherstocking." "It's a fine grain, gal, and I think 'twill carry lead further than common. I am getting old, and can't follow up the game with the step I used to could." Miss Temple waved her hand for silence, and preceded Louisa and the keeper from the apartment. The man turned the key once, and observed that he would return and secure his prisoners when he had lighted the ladies to the street. Accordingly they parted at the door of the building, when the jailer retired to his dungeons, and the ladies walked, with throbbing hearts, toward the corner. "Now the Leatherstocking refuses the money," whispered Louisa. "It can all be given to Mr. Edwards, and that added to—" "Listen," said Elizabeth. "I hear the rustling of the hay. They are escaping at this moment. Oh, they will be detected instantly." By this time they were at the corner, where Edwards and Natty were in the act of drawing the almost helpless body of Benjamin through the aperture. The oxen had started back from their hay, and were standing with their heads down the street, leaving room for the party to act in. "Throw the hay into the cart," said Edwards, "or they will suspect how it has been done. Quick, that they may not see it." Natty had just returned from executing this order, when the light of the keeper's candle shone through the hole, and instantly his voice was heard in the jail, exclaiming for his prisoners. "What is to be done now?" said Edwards. "This drunken fellow will cause our detection, and we have not a moment to spare." "Who's drunk, ye lubber?" muttered the steward. "A break jail! A break jail!" shouted 5 or 6 voices from within. "We must leave him," said Edwards. "'Twouldn't be kind, lad," returned Natty. "He took half the disgrace of the stocks on himself to day, and the creature has feeling." At this moment 2 or 3 men were heard issuing from the door of the Bold Dragoon, and among them the voice of Billy Kirby. "There's no moon yet," cried the wood chopper, "but it's a clear night. Come, who's for home? Hark, what a rumpus they're kicking up in the jail! Here's go and see what it's about." "We shall be lost," said Edwards, "if we don't drop this man." At that instant Elizabeth moved close to him, and said rapidly in a low voice, "Lay him in the cart, and start the oxen. No one will look there." "There's a woman's quickness in the thought," said the youth. The proposition was no sooner made than executed. The steward was seated on the hay, and enjoined to hold his peace
and apply the goad that was placed in his hand, while the oxen were urged on. So soon as this arrangement was completed, Edwards and the hunter stole along the houses for a short distance, when they disappeared through an opening that led into the rear of the buildings. The oxen were in brisk motion, and presently the cries of pursuit were heard in the street. The ladies quickened their pace, with a wish to escape the crowd of constables and idlers that were approaching, some execrating, and some laughing at the exploit of the prisoners. In the confusion, the voice of Kirby was plainly distinguishable above all the others, shouting and swearing that he would have the fugitives, threatening to bring back Natty in one pocket and Benjamin in the other. "Spread yourselves, men!" he cried, as he passed the ladies, his heavy feet sounding along the street like the tread of a dozen. "Spread yourselves! To the mountains! They'll be in the mountains in a quarter of an hour, and then look out for a long rifle." His cries were echoed from 20 mouths, for not only the jail but the taverns had sent forth their numbers, some earnest in the pursuit, and others joining it as in sport. As Elizabeth turned in at her father's gate, she saw the wood chopper stop at the cart, when she gave Benjamin up for lost. While they were hurrying up the walk, two figures, stealing cautiously but quickly under the shades of the trees, met the eyes of the ladies, and in a moment Edwards and the hunter crossed their path. "Miss Temple, I may never see you again," exclaimed the youth. "Let me thank you for all your kindness. You cannot know my motives." "Fly, fly!" cried Elizabeth. "The village is alarmed. Do not be found conversing with me at such a moment, and in these grounds." "Nay, I must speak, though detection were certain. Your retreat to the bridge is already cut off. Before you can gain the wood, your pursuers will be there." If what?" cried the youth. "Your advice has saved me once already. I will follow it to death." "The street is now silent and vacant," said Elizabeth, after a pause. "Cross it, and you will find my father's boat in the lake. It would be easy to land from it where you please in the hills. But Judge Temple might complain of the trespass." "His daughter shall be accountable, sir." The youth uttered something in a low voice that was heard only by Elizabeth, and turned to execute what she had suggested. As they were separating, Natty approached the females, and said, "You'll remember the canister of powder, children? Them beavers must be had, and I and the pups be getting old. We want the best of ammunition." "Come, Natty," said Edwards impatiently. "Coming, lad, coming. God bless you, young ones, both of ye, for ye mean well and kindly to the old man." The ladies paused until they had lost sight of the retreating figures, when they immediately entered the mansion house. While this scene was passing in the walk, Kirby had overtaken the cart, which was his own, and had been driven by Edwards without asking the owner, from the place where the patient oxen usually stood at evening, waiting the pleasure of their master. "Whoa! Come hither, Golden," he cried. "Why, how come you off the end of the bridge where I left you, dummies?" "Heave ahead!" muttered Benjamin, giving a random blow with his lash that alighted on the shoulder of the other. "Who the devil be you?" cried Billy, turning round in surprise, but unable to distinguish in the dark the hard visage that was just peering over the cart rails. "Who be I? Why, I'm helmsman aboard of this here craft, d'ye see, and a straight wake I'm making of it. Ay, I've got the bridge right ahead, and the bilboes dead aft. I calls that good steerage, boy. Heave ahead." "Lay your lash in the right spot, Mr. Benny Pump," said the wood chopper, "or I'll put you in the palm of my hand and box your ears. Where be you going with my team?" "Team?" "Ay, my cart and oxen." "Why, you must know, Master Kirby, that the Leatherstocking and I, that's Benny Pump, you knows Ben? Well, Benny and I, me and Benny, damn me if I know how 'tis, but some of us are bound after a cargo of beaver skins, d'ye see? So we pressed the cart to ship them home in. I say, Master Kirby, what a lubberly oar you pull! You handle an oar, boy, pretty much as a cow would a musket, or a lady would a marling spike." Billy had discovered the state of the steward's mind, and he walked for some time alongside of the cart, musing with himself, when he took the goad from Benjamin, who fell back on the hay and was soon asleep, and drove his cattle down the street, over the bridge, and up the mountain toward a clearing in which he was to work the next day, without any other interruption than a few hasty questions from parties of the constables. Elizabeth stood for an hour at the window of her room, and saw the torches of the pursuers gliding along the side of the mountain, and heard their shouts and alarms, but at the end of that time the last party returned, wearied and disappointed, and the village became as still as when she issued from the gate on her mission to the jail. Chapter 35. Recording by Bill Borst. Chapter 36. Of the Pioneers, or the Sources of the Susquehanna, a Descriptive Tale, by James Fenimore Cooper. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information, or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Chapter 36. And I could weep the Oneida chief his descant wildly thus begun, but that I may not stain with grief the death song of my father's son. Gertrude of Wyoming. It was yet early on the following morning, when Elizabeth and Louisa met by appointment, and proceeded to the store of Monsieur Le Quoi, in order to redeem the pledge the former had given to the Leatherstocking. The people were again assembling for the business of the day, but the hour was too soon for a crowd, and the ladies found the place in possession of its polite owner, Billy Kirby, one female customer, and the boy who did the duty of helper or clerk. Monsieur Le Quoi was perusing a packet of letters with manifest delight, while the wood-chopper, with one hand thrust in his bosom, and the other in the folds of his jacket, holding an axe under his right arm, stood sympathizing in the Frenchman's pleasure with good-natured interest. The freedom of manners that prevailed in the new settlements commonly levelled all difference in rank, and with it, frequently, all considerations of education and intelligence. At the time the ladies entered the store, they were unseen by the owner, who was saying to Kirby, "Aha, Monsieur Bill, this letter make me most happy of mans. Ah, ma chère France, I will see you again." "I rejoice, monsieur, at anything that contributes to your happiness," said Elizabeth, "but hope we are not going to lose you entirely." The complacent shopkeeper changed the language to French, and recounted rapidly to Elizabeth his hopes of being permitted to return to his own country. Habit had, however, so far altered the manners of this pliable personage that he continued to serve the wood-chopper, who was in quest of some tobacco, while he related to his more gentle visitor the happy change that had taken place in the dispositions of his own countrymen. The amount of it all was that Mr. Le Quoi, who had fled from his own country more through terror than because he was offensive to the ruling powers in France, had succeeded at length in getting an assurance that his return to the West Indies would be unnoticed, and the Frenchman, who had sunk into the character of a country shopkeeper with so much grace, was about to emerge again from his obscurity into his proper level in society. We need not repeat the civil things that passed between the parties on this occasion, nor recount the endless repetitions of sorrow that the delighted Frenchman expressed at being compelled to quit the society of Miss Temple. Elizabeth took an opportunity during this expenditure of polite expressions to purchase the powder privately of the boy, who bore the generic appellation of Jonathan. Before they parted, however, Mr. Le Quoi, who seemed to think that he had not said enough, solicited the honor of a private interview with the heiress, with a gravity in his air that announced the importance of the subject. After conceding the favor, and appointing a more favorable time for the meeting, Elizabeth succeeded in getting out of the store, into which the countrymen now began to enter, as usual, where they met with the same attention and bienséance as formerly. Elizabeth and Louisa pursued their walk as far as the bridge in profound silence, but when they reached the place the latter stopped, and appeared anxious to utter something that her diffidence suppressed. "Are you ill, Louisa?" exclaimed Miss Temple. "Had we not better return and seek another opportunity to meet the old man?" "Not ill, but terrified. Oh, I never can go on that hill again, with you only. I am not equal to it, indeed I am not." This was an unexpected declaration to Elizabeth, who, although she experienced no idle apprehension of a danger that no longer existed, felt most sensitively all the delicacy of maiden modesty. She stood for some time deeply reflecting within herself, but sensible it was a time for action instead of reflection, she struggled to shake off her hesitation, and replied firmly, "Well, then it must be done by me alone. There is no other than yourself to be trusted, or poor old Leatherstocking will be discovered. Wait for me in the edge of these woods, that at least I may not be seen strolling in the hills by myself just now. One would not wish to create remarks, Louisa, if you will wait for me, dear girl?" "A year in sight of the village, Miss Temple," returned the agitated Louisa; "but do not ask me to go on that hill." Elizabeth found that her companion was really unable to proceed, and they completed their arrangement by posting Louisa out of the observation of the people who occasionally passed, but nigh the road, and in plain view of the whole valley. Miss Temple then proceeded alone. She ascended the road which has been so often mentioned in our narrative, with an elastic and firm step, fearful that the delay in the store of Mr. Le Quoi, and the time necessary for reaching the summit, would prevent her being punctual to the appointment. Whenever she pressed an opening in the bushes, she would pause for breath, or, perhaps drawn from her pursuit by the picture at her feet, would linger a moment to gaze at the beauties of the valley. The long drought had, however, changed its coat of verdure to a hue of brown, and though the same localities were there, the view wanted the lively and cheering aspect of early summer. Even the heavens seemed to share in the dried appearance of the earth, for the sun was concealed by a haziness in the atmosphere which looked like a thin smoke without a particle of moisture, if such a thing were possible. The blue sky was scarcely to be seen, though now and then there was a faint lighting up in spots through which masses of rolling vapor could be discerned gathering around the horizon, as if nature were struggling to collect her floods for the relief of man. The very atmosphere that Elizabeth inhaled was hot and dry, and by the time she reached the point where the course led her from the highway, she experienced a sensation like suffocation. But, disregarding her feelings, she hastened to execute her mission, dwelling on nothing but the disappointment, and even the helplessness, the hunter would experience without her aid. On the summit of the mountain which Judge Temple had named the Vision, a little spot had been cleared, in order that a better view might be obtained of the village and the valley. At this point Elizabeth understood the hunter she was to meet him, and thither she urged her way as expeditiously as the difficulty of the ascent, and the impediment of a forest in a state of nature, would admit. Numberless were the fragments of rocks, trunks of fallen trees and branches, with which she had to contend, but every difficulty vanished before her resolution, and by her own watch she stood on the desired spot several minutes before the appointed hour. After resting a moment on the end of a log, Miss Temple cast a glance about her in quest of her old friend, but he was evidently not in the clearing. She arose and walked around its skirts, examining every place where she thought it probable Natty might deem it prudent to conceal himself. Her search was fruitless, and after exhausting not only herself, but her conjectures, in efforts to discover or imagine his situation, she ventured to trust her voice in that solitary place. "Natty! Leatherstocking! Old man!" she called aloud in every direction, but no answer was given excepting the reverberations of her own clear tones, as they were echoed in the parched forest. Elizabeth approached the brow of the mountain, where a faint cry, like the noise produced by striking the hand against the mouth, at the same time that the breath is strongly exhaled, was heard answering to her own voice. Not doubting in the least that it was the Leatherstocking lying in wait for her, and who gave that signal to indicate the place where he was to be found, Elizabeth descended for near 100 feet, until she gained a little natural terrace, thinly scattered with trees, that grew in the fissures of the rocks, which were covered by a scanty soil. She had advanced to the edge of this platform, and was gazing over the perpendicular precipice that formed its face, when a rustling among the dry leaves near her drew her eyes in another direction. Our heroine certainly was startled by the object that she then saw, but a moment restored her self-possession, and she advanced firmly, and with some interest in her manner, to the spot. Mohegan was seated on the trunk of a fallen oak, with his tawny visage turned toward her, and his eyes fixed on her face with an expression of wildness and fire, that would have terrified a less resolute female. His blanket had fallen from his shoulders, and was lying in folds around him, leaving his breast, arms, and most of his body bare. The medallion of Washington reposed on his chest, a badge of distinction that Elizabeth well knew he only produced on great and solemn occasions. But the whole appearance of the aged chief was more studied than common, and in some particulars it was terrific. The long black hair was plaited on his head, falling away so as to expose his high forehead and piercing eyes. In the enormous incisions of his ears were entwined ornaments of silver, beads, and porcupine's quills, mingled in a rude taste, and after the Indian fashions. A large drop, composed of similar materials, was suspended from the cartilage of his nose, and falling below his lips, rested on his chin. Streaks of red paint crossed his wrinkled brow, and were traced down his cheeks, with such variations in the lines as caprice or custom suggested. His body was also colored in the same manner, the whole exhibiting an Indian warrior prepared for some event of more than usual moment.
"John, how fare you, worthy John?" said Elizabeth, as she approached him. "You have long been a stranger in the village. You promised me a willow basket, and I have long had a shirt of calico in readiness for you." The Indian looked steadily at her for some time without answering, and then, shaking his head, he replied in his low, guttural tones, "John's hand can make baskets no more. He wants no shirt." "But if he should, he will know where to come for it," returned Miss Temple. "Indeed, old John, I feel as if you had a natural right to order what you will from us." "Daughter," said the Indian, "listen. 6 times 10 hot summers have passed since John was young, tall like a pine, straight like the bullet of Hawkeye, strong as all buffalo, spry as the cat of the mountain. He was strong, and a warrior like the young eagle. If his tribe wanted to track the Maquas for many suns, the eye of Chingachgook found the print of their moccasins. If the people feasted and were glad as they counted the scalps of their enemies, it was on his pole they hung. If the squaws cried because there was no meat for their children, he was the first in the chase. His bullet was swifter than the deer. Daughter, then Chingachgook struck his tomahawk into the trees. It was to tell the lazy ones where to find him and the Mingoes. But he made no baskets." "Those times have gone by, old warrior," returned Elizabeth. "Since then your people have disappeared, and in place of chasing your enemies, you have learned to fear God and to live at peace. Stand here, daughter, where you can see the great spring, the wigwams of your father, and the land on the crooked river. John was young when his tribe gave away the country, in council, from where the Blue Mountain stands above the water, to where the Susquehanna is hid by the trees. All this, and all that grew in it, and all that walked over it, and all that fed there, they gave to the Fire Eater, for they loved him. He was strong, and they were women, and he helped them. No Delaware would kill a deer that ran in his woods, nor stop a bird that flew over his land, for it was his. Has John lived in peace? Daughter, since John was young, he has seen the white man from Frontenac come down on his white brothers at Albany and fight. Did they fear God? He has seen his English and his American fathers burying their tomahawks in each other's brains, for this very land. Did they fear God, and live in peace? He has seen the land pass away from the fire-eater and his children, and the child of his child, and a new chief set over the country. Did they live in peace who did this? Did they fear God? Such is the custom of the whites, John. Do not the Delawares fight, and exchange their lands for powder, and blankets, and merchandise?" The Indian turned his dark eyes on his companion, and kept them there with a scrutiny that alarmed her a little. "Where are the blankets and merchandise that bought the right of the fire-eater?" he replied in a more animated voice. "Are they with him in his wigwam? Did they say to him, 'Brother, sell us your land, and take this gold, this silver, these blankets, these rifles, or even this rum?' No, they tore it from him, as a scalp is torn from an enemy. And they that did it looked not behind them, to see whether he lived or died. Do such men live in peace and fear the Great Spirit?" "But you hardly understand the circumstances," said Elizabeth, more embarrassed than she would own, even to herself. "If you knew our laws and customs better, you would judge differently of our acts. Do not believe evil of my father, old Mohegan, for he is just and good." "The brother of Miquon is good, and he will do right. I have said it to Hawkeye. I have said it to the Young Eagle, that the brother of Miquon would do justice." "Whom call you the Young Eagle?" said Elizabeth, averting her face from the gaze of the Indian, as she asked the question. "Whence comes he, and what are his rights?" "Has my daughter lived so long with him to ask this question?" returned the Indian warily. "Old age freezes up the blood, as the frosts cover the great spring in winter, but youth keeps the streams of the blood open, like a sun in the time of blossoms. The Young Eagle has eyes. Had he no tongue?" The loveliness to which the old warrior alluded was in no degree diminished by his allegorical speech, for the blushes of the maiden who listened covered her burning cheeks till her dark eyes seemed to glow with their reflection. But after struggling a moment with shame, she laughed, as if unwilling to understand him seriously, and replied in pleasantry, "Not to make me the mistress of his secret. He is too much of a Delaware to tell his secret thoughts to a woman. Daughter, the Great Spirit made your father with a white skin, and he made mine with a red, but he colored both their hearts with blood. When young, it is swift and warm, but when old, it is still and cold. Is there difference below the skin? No. Once John had a woman. She was the mother of so many sons." He raised his hand with 3 fingers elevated. "And she had daughters that would have made the young Delawares happy. She was kind, daughter, and what I said she did. You have different fashions, but do you think John did not love the wife of his youth, the mother of his children?" "And what has become of your family, John? Your wife and your children?" asked Elizabeth, touched by the Indian's manner. "Where is the ice that covered the great spring? It is melted, and gone with the waters. John has lived till all his people have left him for the land of spirits. His time has come, and he is ready." Mohegan dropped his head in his blanket and sat in silence. Miss Temple knew not what to say. She wished to draw the thoughts of the old warrior from his gloomy recollections, but there was a dignity in his sorrow, and in his fortitude, that repressed her efforts to speak. After a long pause, however, she renewed the discourse by asking, "Where is the Leatherstocking, John? I have brought this canister of powder at his request, but he is nowhere to be seen. Will you take charge of it, and see it delivered?" The Indian raised his head slowly, and looked earnestly at the gift, which she put into his hand. "This is the great enemy of my nation. Without this, when could the white man drive the Delawares? Daughter, the Great Spirit gave your fathers to know how to make guns and powder, that they might sweep the Indians from the land. There will soon be no red skin in the country. When John has gone, the last will leave these hills, and his family will be dead." The aged warrior stretched his body forward, leaning an elbow on his knee, and appeared to be taking a parting look at the objects of the vale,
which were still visible through the misty atmosphere, though the air seemed to thicken at each moment around Miss Temple, who became conscious of an increased difficulty of respiration. The eye of Mohegan changed gradually from its sorrowful expression to a look of wildness that might be supposed to border on the inspiration of a prophet, as he continued: "But he will go on to the country where his fathers have met. The game shall be plenty as the ash in the lakes. No woman shall cry for meat, no Mingo can ever come. The chase shall be for children, and all just red men shall live together as brothers." "John, this is not the heaven of a Christian," cried Miss Temple. "You deal now in the superstition of your forefathers." "Fathers, sons," said Mohegan with firmness, "all gone, all gone. I have no son but the Young Eagle, and he has the blood of a white man." "Tell me, John," said Elizabeth, willing to draw his thoughts to other subjects, and at the same time yielding to her own powerful interest in the youth, "who is this Mr. Edwards? Why are you so fond of him, and whence does he come?" The Indian started at the question, which evidently recalled his recollection to earth. Taking her hand, he drew Miss Temple to a seat beside him, and pointed to the country beneath them. "See, daughter," he said, directing her looks toward the north, "as far as your young eyes can see, it was the land of his." But immense volumes of smoke at that moment rolled over their heath, and, whirling in the eddies formed by the mountains, interposed a barrier to their sight, while he was speaking. Startled by this circumstance, Miss Temple sprang to her feet, and, turning her eyes toward the summit of the mountain, she beheld it covered by a similar canopy, while a roaring sound was heard in the forest above her like the rushing of winds. "What means it, John?" she exclaimed. "We are enveloped in smoke, and I feel a heat like the glow of a furnace." Before the Indian could reply, a voice was heard crying in the woods: "John! Where are you, old Mohegan? The woods are on fire, and you have but a minute for escape." The chief put his hand before his mouth, and making it lay on his lips, produced the kind of noise that had attracted Elizabeth to the place, when a quick and hurried step was heard dashing through the dried underbrush and bushes, and presently Edwards rushed to his side, with horror on every feature. Chapter 36. Recording by Bill Borst. Chapter 37 of the Pioneers, or the Sources of the Susquehanna, a Descriptive Tale, by James Fenimore Cooper. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information, or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Chapter 37. Love rules the court, the camp, the grove. Lay of the Last Minstrel. "It would have been sad, indeed, to lose you in such a manner, my old friend," said Oliver, catching his breath for utterance. "Up and away! Even now we may be too late. The flames are circling round the point of the rock below, and unless we can pass there, our only chance must be over the precipice. Away, away! Shake off your apathy, John. Now is the time of need." Mohegan pointed toward Elizabeth, who, forgetting her danger, had sunk back to a projection of the rock as soon as she recognized the sounds of Edward's voice, and said with something like awakened animation: "Save her! Leave John to die!" "Her! Whom mean you?" cried the youth, turning quickly to the place the other indicated; but when he saw the figure of Elizabeth bending toward him, in an attitude that powerfully spoke terror, blended with reluctance to meet him in such a place, the shock deprived him of speech. "Miss Temple," he cried, when he found words, "you here! Is such a death reserved for you?" "No, no, no, no death, I hope, for any of us, Mr. Edwards," she replied, endeavoring to speak calmly. "There is smoke, but no fire to harm us. Let us endeavor to retire." "Take my arm," said Edwards. "There must be an opening in some direction for your retreat. Are you equal to the effort?" "Certainly. You surely magnify the danger, Mr. Edwards. Lead me out the way you came." I will, cried the youth, with a kind of hysterical utterance. "No, no, there is no danger. I have alarmed you unnecessarily." But shall we leave the Indian? Can we leave him, as he says, to die?" An expression of painful emotion crossed the face of the young man. He stopped and cast a longing look at Mohegan, but, dragging his companion after him, even against her will, he pursued his way with enormous strides toward the pass by which he had just entered the circle of flame. "Do not regard him," he said in those tones that denote a desperate calmness. "He is used to the woods, and such scenes, and he will escape up the mountain, over the rock, or he can remain where he is in safety." "You thought not so this moment, Edwards? Do not leave him there to meet with such a death," cried Elizabeth, fixing a look on the countenance of her conductor that seemed to distrust his sanity. "An Indian born! Who ever heard of an Indian dying by fire? An Indian cannot burn. The idea is ridiculous. Hasten, hasten, Miss Temple, or the smoke may incommodate you." "Edwards, your look, your eye, terrifies me. Tell me the danger. Is it greater than it seems? I am equal to any trial." "If we reach the point of yon rock before that sheet of fire, we are safe, Miss Temple," exclaimed the young man in a voice that burst without the bounds of his forced composure. "Fly. The struggle is for life." The place of the interview between Miss Temple and the Indian has already been described as one of those platforms of rock, which form a sort of terrace in the mountains of that country, and the face of it, we have said, was both high and perpendicular. Its shape was nearly a natural arc, the ends of which blended with the mountain, at points where its sides were less abrupt in their descent. It was round one of these terminations of the sweep of the rock that Edwards had ascended, and it was toward the same place that he urged Elizabeth to a desperate exertion of speed. Immense clouds of white smoke had been pouring over the summit of the mountain, and had concealed the approach and ravages of the element, but a crackling sound drew the eyes of Miss Temple, as she flew over the ground supported by the young man, toward the outline of smoke where she already perceived the waving flames shooting forward from the vapor, now flaring high in the air, and then bending to the earth, seeming to light into combustion every stick and shrub on which they breathed. The sight aroused them to redoubled efforts, but unfortunately a collection of the tops of trees, old and dried, lay directly across their course, and at the very moment when both had thought their safety insured, the warm current of the air swept a forked tongue of flame across the pile, which lighted at the touch, and when they reached the spot, the flying pair were opposed by the surly roaring of a body of fire, as if a furnace were glowing in their path. They recoiled from the heat, and stood on a point of the rock, gazing in a stupor at the flames which were spreading rapidly down the mountain, whose side, too, became a sheet of living fire. It was dangerous for one clad in the light and airy dress of Elizabeth to approach even the vicinity of the raging element, and those flowing robes, that gave such softness and grace to her form, seemed now to be formed for the instruments of her destruction. The villagers were accustomed to resort to that hill, in quest of timber and fuel, in procuring which, it was their usage to take only the bodies of the trees, leaving the tops and branches to decay under the operations of the weather. Much of the hill was consequently covered with such light fuel, which, having been scorched under the sun for the last 2 months, was ignited with a touch. Indeed, in some cases there did not appear to be any contact between the fire and these piles, but the flames seemed to dart from heap to heap, as the fabulous fire of the temple is represented to reillumine its neglected lamp. There was beauty as well as terror in the sight, and Edwards and Elizabeth stood viewing the progress of the desolation with a strange mixture of horror and interest. The former, however, shortly roused himself to new exertions, and drawing his companion after him, they skirted the edge of the smoke, the young man penetrating frequently into its dense volumes in search of a passage, but in every instance without success. In this manner they proceeded in a semicircle around the upper part of the terrace, until, arriving at the verge of the precipice opposite to the point where Edwards had ascended, the horrid conviction burst on both, at the same instant, that they were completely encircled by fire. So long as a single pass up or down the mountain was unexplored, there was hope; but when retreat seemed to be absolutely impracticable, the horror of their situation broke upon Elizabeth as powerfully as if she had hitherto considered the danger light. "This mountain is doomed to be fatal to me," she whispered. "We shall find our graves on it." "Say not so, Miss Temple. There is yet hope," returned the youth, in the same tone, while the vacant expression of his eye contradicted his words. "Let us return to the point of the rock. There must be, some place about it where we can descend." "Lead me there!" exclaimed Elizabeth. "Let us leave no effort untried." She did not wait for his compliance, but, turning, retraced her steps to the brow of the precipice, murmuring to herself, in suppressed hysterical sobs, "My father! My poor, my distracted father!" Edwards was by her side in an instant, and with aching eyes he examined every fissure in the crags in quest of some opening that might offer facilities for flight. But the smooth, even surface of the rocks afforded hardly a resting place for a foot, much less those continued projections which would have been necessary for a descent of nearly 100 feet. Edwards was not slow in feeling the conviction that this hope was also futile, and with a kind of feverish despair that still urged him to action, he turned to some new expedient. "There is nothing left, Miss Temple," he said, "but to lower you from this place to the rock beneath. If Natty were here, or even that Indian could be roused, their ingenuity and long practice would easily devise methods to do it. But I am a child at this moment in everything but daring. Where shall I find means? This dress of mine is so light, and there is so little of it. Then the blanket of Mohegan. We must try. We must try. Anything is better than to see you a victim to such a death." "And what will become of you?" said Elizabeth. Indeed, neither you nor John must be sacrificed to my safety." He heard her not, for he was already by the side of Mohegan, who yielded his blanket without a question, retaining his seat with Indian dignity and composure, though his own situation was even more critical than that of the others. The blanket was cut into shreds, and the fragments fastened together. The loose linen jacket of the youth and the light muslin shawl of Elizabeth were attached to them, and the whole thrown over the rocks with the rapidity of lightning, but the united pieces did not reach half way to the bottom. "It will not do! It will not do!" cried Elizabeth. "For me there is no hope. The fire comes slowly but certainly. See, it destroys the very earth before it." Had the flames spread on that rock with half the quickness with which they leaped from bush to tree in other parts of the mountain, our painful task would have soon ended, for they would have consumed already the captives they enclosed. But the peculiarity of their situation afforded Elizabeth and her companion the respite of which they had availed themselves to make the efforts we have recorded. The thin covering of earth on the rock supported but a scanty and faded herbage, and most of the trees that had found root in the fissures had already died, during the intense heats of preceding summers. Those which still retained the appearance of life bore a few dry and withered leaves, while the others were merely the wrecks of pines, oaks, and maples. No better materials to feed the fire could be found, had there been a communication with the flames, but the ground was destitute of the brush that led the destructive element, like a torrent, over the remainder of the hill. As auxiliary to this scarcity of fuel, one of the large springs which abound in that country gushed out of the side of the ascent above, and after creeping sluggishly along the level land, saturating the mossy covering of the rock with moisture, it swept around the base of the little cone that formed the pinnacle of the mountain, and, entering the canopy of smoke near one of the terminations of the terrace, found its way to the lake, not by dashing from rock to rock, but by the secret channels of the earth. It would rise to the surface here and there in the wet seasons, but in the droughts of summer it was to be traced only by the bogs and moss that announced the proximity of water. When the fire reached this barrier, it was compelled to pause, until a concentration of its heat could overcome the moisture, like an army awaiting the operations of a battering train to open its way to desolation. That fatal moment seemed now to have arrived, for the hissing steams of the spring appeared to be nearly exhausted, and the moss of the rocks was already curling under the intense heat, while fragments of bark that yet clung to the dead trees began to separate from their trunks, and fall to the ground in crumbling masses. The air seemed quivering with rays of heat, which might be seen playing along the parched stems of the trees. There were moments when dark clouds of smoke would sweep along the little terrace, and as the eye lost its power, the other senses contributed to give effect to the fearful horror of the scene. At such moments the roaring of the flames, the crackling of the furious element, with the tearing of falling branches, and occasionally the thundering echoes of some falling tree, united to alarm the victims. Of the three, however, the youth appeared much the most agitated. Elizabeth, having relinquished entirely the idea of escape, was fast obtaining that resigned composure with which the most delicate of her sex are sometimes known to meet unavoidable evils, while Mohegan, who was much nearer to the danger, maintained his seat with the invincible resignation of an Indian warrior. Once or twice the eye of the aged chief, which was ordinarily fixed in the direction of the distant hills, turned toward the young pair, who seemed doomed to so early a death, with a slight indication of pity crossing his composed features, but it would immediately revert again to its former gaze, as if already looking into the womb of futurity. Much of the time he was chanting a kind of low dirge in the Delaware tongue, using the deep and remarkable guttural tones of his people. "At such a moment, Mr. Edwards, all earthly distinctions end," whispered Elizabeth. "Persuade John to move nearer to us. Let us die together." "I cannot. He will not stir," returned the youth, in the same horridly still tones. "He considers this as the happiest moment of his life. He is past 70, and has been decaying rapidly for some time. He received some injury in chasing that unlucky deer, too, on the lake." "Oh, Miss Temple, that was an unlucky chase, indeed. It has led, I fear, to this awful scene." The smile of Elizabeth was celestial. "Why name such a trifle now? At this moment the heart is dead to all earthly emotions. If anything could reconcile a man to this death," cried the youth, "it would be to meet it in such company." "Talk not so, Edwards, talk not so," interrupted Miss Temple. "I am unworthy of it, and it is unjust to yourself. We must die, yes, yes, we must die. It is the will of God, and let us endeavor to submit like his own children." "Die!" the youth rather shrieked than exclaimed. "No, no, no, there must yet be hope. You, at least, must not, shall not die." "In what way can we escape?" asked Elizabeth, pointing with a look of heavenly composure toward the fire. "Observe, the flame is crossing the barrier of wet ground. It comes slowly, Edwards, but surely. Ah, see, the tree is already lighted." Her words were too true. The heat of the conflagration had at length overcome the resistance of the spring, and the fire was slowly stealing along the half-dried moss, while a dead pine kindled with the touch of a forked flame, that for a moment wreathed around the stem of the tree, as it whined, in one of its evolutions, under the influence of the air. The effect was instantaneous. The flames danced along the parched trunk of the pine, like lightning quivering on a chain, and immediately a column of living fire was raging on the terrace. It soon spread from tree to tree, and the scene was evidently drawing to a close. The log on which Mohegan was seated lighted at its further end, and the Indian appeared to be surrounded by fire. Still he was unmoved. As his body was unprotected, his sufferings must have been great, but his fortitude was superior to all. His voice could yet be heard even in the midst of these horrors. Elizabeth turned her head from the sight, and faced the valley. Furious eddies of wind were created by the heat, and just at the moment the canopy of fiery smoke that overhung the valley was cleared away, leaving a distinct view of the peaceful village beneath them. "My father, "My father!" shrieked Elizabeth. "Oh, this surely might have been spared me, but I submit." The distance was not so great but the figure of Judge Temple could be seen, standing in his own grounds, and apparently contemplating, in perfect unconsciousness of the danger of his child, the mountain in flames. This sight was still more painful than the approaching danger, and Elizabeth again faced the hill. "My intemperate warmth has done this," cried Edwards, in the accents of despair. "If I had possessed but a moiety of your heavenly resignation, Miss Temple, all might yet have been well." "Name it not, name it not," she said. "It is now of no avail. We must die, Edwards, we must die. Let us do so as Christians. But no, you may yet escape, perhaps. Your dress is not so fatal as mine. Fly, leave me. An opening may yet be found for you, possibly. Certainly it is worth the effort. Fly, leave me. But stay. You will see my father, my poor, my bereaved father. Say to him, then, Edwards, say to him all that can appease his anguish. Tell him that I died happy and collected, that I have gone to my beloved mother, that the hours of this life are nothing when balanced in the scales of eternity. Say how we shall meet again. And say," she continued, dropping her voice, that had risen with her feelings, as if conscious of her worldly weakness, "how dear, how very dear was my love for him, that it was near, too near, to my love for God." The youth listened to her touching accents, but moved not. In a moment he found utterance, and replied, "And it is me that you command to leave you on the edge of the grave? Oh, Miss Temple, how little have you known me!" he cried, dropping on his knees at her feet, and gathering her flowing robe in his arms as if to shield her from the flames. "I have been driven to the woods in despair, but your society has tamed the lion within me. If I have wasted my time in degradation, 'twas you that charmed me to it. If I have forgotten my name and family, your form supplied the place of memory. If I have forgotten my wrongs, 'twas you that taught me charity. No, no, dearest Elizabeth, I may die with you, but I can never leave you." Elizabeth moved not, nor answered. It was plain that her thoughts had been raised from the earth. The recollection of her father, and her regrets at their separation, had been mellowed by a holy sentiment that lifted her above the level of earthly things, and she was fast losing the weakness of her sex in the near view of eternity. But as she listened to those words she became once more woman. She struggled against these feelings, and smiled, as she thought she was shaking off the last lingering feeling of nature, when the world, and all its seductions, rushed again to her heart, with the sounds of a human voice, crying in piercing tones, "Gal! Where be ye, gal? Gladden the heart of an old man, if ye yet belong to 'arth." "Hist!" said Elizabeth. "'Tis the Leatherstocking. He seeks me." "'Tis Natty," shouted Edwards, "and we may yet be saved." A wide encircling flame glared on their eyes for a moment, even above the fire of the woods, and a loud report followed. "'Tis the canister! 'Tis the powder!" cried the same voice, evidently approaching them. "'Tis the canister, and the precious child is lost." At the next instant Natty rushed through the steams of the spring, and appeared on the terrace, without his deerskin cap, his hair burnt to his head, his shirt of country check, black and filled with holes, and his red features of a deeper color than ever, by the heat he had encountered. End of Chapter 37. Recording by Bill Vorst. Chapter 38 of The Pioneers, or The Sources of the Susquehanna, a Descriptive Tale by James Fenimore Cooper. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Chapter 38. Even from the land of shadows, now my father's awful ghost appears. Gertrude of Wyoming. For an hour after Louisa Grant was left by Miss Temple, in the situation already mentioned, she continued in feverish anxiety, awaiting the return of her friend. But as the time passed by without the reappearance of Elizabeth, the terror of Louisa gradually increased, until her alarmed fancy had conjured every species of danger that appertained to the woods, excepting the one that really existed. The heavens had become obscured by degrees, and vast volumes of smoke were pouring over the valley, but the thoughts of Louisa were still recurring to beasts, without dreaming of the real cause for apprehension. She was stationed in the edge of the low pines and chestnuts that succeed the first or large growth of the forest, and directly above the angle where the highway turned from the straight course to the village, and ascended the mountain laterally. Consequently, she commanded a view not only of the valley, but of the road beneath her. The few travelers that passed, she observed, were engaged in earnest conversation, and frequently raised their eyes to the hill, and at length she saw the people leaving the court-house, and gazing upward also. While under the influence of the alarm excited by such unusual movements, reluctant to go, and yet fearful to remain, Louisa was startled by the low, cracking, but cautious treads of some one approaching through the bushes. She was on the eve of flight, when Natty emerged from the cover, and stood at her side. The old man laughed as he shook her kindly by a hand that was passive with fear. "I am glad to meet you here, child," he said, "for the back of the mountain is afire, and it would be dangerous to go up it now, till it has been burnt over once, and the dead wood is gone. There's a foolish man, the comrade of that varmint who has given me all this trouble, digging for ore on the east side. I told him that the careless fellows who thought to catch a practised hunter in the woods after dark had thrown the lighted pine knots in the brush, and that would kindle like tow, and warned him to leave the hill. But he was set upon his business, and nothing short of Providence could move him. If he isn't burnt and buried in a grave of his own digging, he's made of salamanders. Why, what ails the child? You look as skeary as if you'd seed more painters. I wish there were more to be found. They'd count up faster than the beaver. But where's the good child with a bad father? Did she forget her promise to the old man?" "The hill! The hill!" shrieked Louisa. "She seeks you on the hill with the powder." Natty recoiled several feet at this unexpected intelligence. "The Lord of heaven have mercy on her! She's on the vision, and that's a sheet of fire ag'in this. Child, if ye love the dear one, and hope to find a friend when you need it most, to the village, and give the alarm. The men are used to fighting fire, and there may be a chance left. Fly, I bid ye fly, nor stop even for breath." The Leatherstocking had no sooner uttered this injunction than he disappeared in the bushes, and, when last seen by Louisa, was rushing up the mountain with a speed that none but those who were accustomed to the toil could attain. "Have I found ye?" the old man exclaimed, when he burst out of the smoke. "God be praised that I have found ye! But follow, there's no time for talking." "My dress," said Elizabeth. "It would be fatal to trust myself nearer to the flames in it." "I bethought me of your flimsy things," cried Natty, throwing loose the folds of a covering buckskin that he carried on his arm, and wrapping her form in it, in such a manner as to envelop her whole person. "Now, follow, for it's a matter of life and death to us all." "But John, what will become of John?" cried Edwards. "Can we leave the old warrior here to perish?" The eyes of Natty followed the direction of Edward's finger, where he beheld the Indian still seated as before, with the very earth under his feet consuming with fire. Without delay the hunter approached the spot, and spoke in Delaware. "Up and away, Chingachgook! Will ye stay here to burn like a Mingo at the stake? The Moravians have teached ye better, I hope. The Lord preserve me if the powder hasn't flashed atween his legs, and the skin of his back is roasting. Will ye come, I say? Will ye follow me?" "Why should Mohegan go?" returned the Indian, gloomily. "He has seen the days of an eagle, and his eye grows dim. He looks on the valley, he looks on the water, he looks in the hunting grounds, but he sees no Delawares. Every one has a white skin. My fathers say, from the far-off land, Come. My women, my young warriors, my tribe, say, Come. The Great Spirit says, Come. Let Mohegan die, "But you forget your friend," cried Edwards. "'Tis useless to talk to an Indian with the death fit on him, lad," interrupted Natty, who seized the strips of the blanket, and with wonderful dexterity strapped the passive chieftain to his own back. When he turned, and with a strength that seemed to bid defiance, not only to his years, but to his load, he led the way to the point whence he had issued. As they crossed the little terrace of rock, one of the dead trees, that had been tottering for several minutes, fell on the spot where they had stood, and filled the air with its cinders. Such an event quickened the steps of the party, who followed the Leatherstocking with the urgency required by the occasion. "Tread on the soft ground," he cried, when they were in a gloom where sight availed them but little, "and keep in the white smoke. Keep the skin close on her, lad, she's a precious one. Another will be hard to be found." Obedient to the hunter's directions, they followed his steps and advice implicitly, and although the narrow passage along the winding of the spring led amid burning logs and falling branches, they happily achieved it in safety. No one but a man long accustomed to the woods could have traced his route through the smoke, in which respiration was difficult and sight nearly useless, but the experience of Natty conducted them to an opening through the rocks, where, with a little difficulty, they soon descended to another terrace, and emerged at once into a tolerably clear atmosphere. The feelings of Edwards and Elizabeth at reaching this spot may be imagined, though not easily described. No one seemed to exult more than their guide, who turned with Mohegan still lashed to his back, and, laughing in his own manner, said, "I know'd 'twas the Frenchman's powder, gal. It went so altogether. Your coarse grain will squib for a minute. The Iroquois had none of the best powder when I went ag'in the Canada tribes under Sir William. Did I ever tell you the story, lad, consarning the scrimmage with—" "For God's sake, tell me nothing now, Natty, until we are entirely safe. Where shall we go next?" "Why, on the platform of rock over the cave, to be sure. You will be safe enough there, or we'll go into it if you be so minded." The young man started, and appeared agitated, but looking around him with an anxious eye, said quickly, "Shalt we be safe on the rock? Cannot the fire reach us there, too?" "Can't the boy see?" said Natty, with the coolness of one accustomed to the kind of danger he had just encountered. "Had you stayed in the place above 10 minutes longer, you would both have been in ashes, but here you may stay forever, and no fire can touch you, until they burn the rocks as well as the woods." With this assurance, which was obviously true, they proceeded to the spot, and Natty deposited his load, placing the Indian on the ground with his back against a fragment of the rocks. Elizabeth sank on the ground and buried her face in her hands, while her heart was swelling with a variety of conflicting emotions. "Let me urge you to take a restorative, Miss Temple," said Edwards respectfully. "Your frame will sink else." Leave me," she said, raising her beaming eyes for a moment to his. "I feel too much for words. I am grateful, Oliver, for this miraculous escape, and next to my God, to you." Edwards withdrew to the edge of the rock, and shouted, "Benjamin! Where are you, Benjamin?" A hoarse voice replied, as if from the bowels of the earth. "Hereaway, master. Stowed in this here bit of a hole, which is all the time as hot as the cook's coppers. I'm tired of my berth, d'ye see, and if so be that Leatherstocking has got much overhauling to do before he sails after them said beaver, I'll go into dock again, and write out my quarantine, till I can get pratic from the law, and so hold on upon the rest of my spaniolas." "Bring up a glass of water from the spring," continued Edwards, "and throw a little wine in it. Hasten, I entreat you." "I knows but little of your small drink, Master Oliver," returned the steward, his voice issuing out of the cave into the open air, "and the Jamaiky held out no longer than to take a parting kiss with Billy Kirby, when he anchored me alongside the highway last night, where you run me down in the chase. But here's summat of a red color that may suit a weak stomach, mayhap. That Master Kirby is no first rate in a boat, but he'll tack a cart among the stumps, all the same as a London pilot will back and fill through the colliers in the pool." As the steward ascended while talking, by the time he had ended his speech he appeared on the rock with the desired restoratives, exhibiting the worn-out and bloated features of a man who had run deep in a debauch, and that lately. Elizabeth took from the hands of Edwards the liquor which he offered, and then motioned to be left again to herself. The youth turned at her bidding, and observed Natty kindly assiduous around the person of Mohegan. When their eyes met, the hunter said sorrowfully, "His time is come, lad. See it in his eyes. When an Indian fixes his eye, he means to go but to one place, and what the wilful creatures put their minds on, they're sure to do." A quick tread prevented the reply, and in a few moments, to the amazement of the whole party, Mr. Grant was seen clinging to the side of the mountain, and striving to reach the place where they stood. Oliver sprang to his assistance, and by their united efforts the worthy divine was soon placed safely among them. "How came you added to our number?" cried Edwards. "Is the hill alive with people at a time like this?" The hasty but pious thanksgivings of the clergyman were soon ejaculated, and when he succeeded in collecting his bewildered senses, he replied, "I heard that my child was seen coming to the mountain, and when the fire broke over its summit, my uneasiness drew me up the road, where I found Louisa, in terror for Miss Temple. It was to seek her that I came into this dangerous place, and I think, but for God's mercy, through the dogs of Natty, I should have perished in the flames myself." "Ay, follow the hounds, and if there's an opening they'll scent it out," said Natty. "Their noses be given them the same as man's reason." "I did so, and they led me to this place, but praise be to God that I see you all safe and well." "No, no," returned the hunter, "safe we be, but as for well, John can't be called in a good way, unless you'll say that for a man that's taking his last look at 'arth." "He speaks the truth," said the divine, with the holy awe with which he ever approached the dying. "I have been by too many deathbeds not to see that the hand of the tyrant is laid on this old warrior. Oh, how consoling it is to know that he has not rejected the offered mercy in the hour of his strength and of worldly temptations. The offspring of a race of heathens, he has in truth been as a brand plucked from the burning." "No, no," returned Natty, who alone stood with him by the side of the dying warrior. "It is no burning that ails him, though his Indian feelings made him scorn to move, unless it be the burning of man's wicked thoughts for near fourscore years, but it's nature giving out in a chasm that's run too long. Down with you, Hector, down, I say. Flesh isn't iron, that a man can live forever, and see his kith and kin driven to a far country, and he left to mourn, with none to keep him company." "John," said the divine tenderly, "do you hear me? Do you wish the prayers appointed by the church at this trying moment?" The Indian turned his ghastly face toward the speaker, and fastened his dark eyes on him steadily but vacantly. No sign of recognition was made, and in a moment he moved his head again slowly toward the vale, and began to sing, using his own language, in those low guttural tones that have been so often mentioned, his notes rising with his theme, till they swelled so loud as to be distinct. "I will come, I will come, to the land of the just I will come. The Maquas I have slain the Maquas, and the Great Spirit calls to his Son. I will come to the land of the just, I will come." "What says he, Leatherstocking?" inquired the priest with tender interest. "Sings he the Redeemer's praise?" "No, no, 'tis his own praise that he speaks now," said Natty, turning in a melancholy manner from the sight of his dying friend. "And a good right he has to say it all, for I know every word to be true." "May Heaven avert such self-righteousness from his heart. Humility and penitence are the seals of Christianity, and without feeling them deeply seated in the soul, all hope is delusive, and leads to vain expectations. Praise himself when his whole soul and body should unite to praise his Maker. John, you have enjoyed the blessings of a gospel ministry, and have been called from out a multitude of sinners and pagans, and, I trust, for a wise and gracious purpose. Do you now feel what it is to be justified by our Saviour's death, and reject all weak and idle dependence on good works that spring from man's pride and vainglory?" The Indian did not regard his interrogator, but he raised his head again, and said in a low, distinct voice, "Who can say that the Maquas know the back of the Mohegan? What enemy that trusted in him did not see the morning? What Mingo that he chased ever sang the song of triumph? Did Mohegan ever he, No, the truth lived in him, and none else could come out of him. In his youth he was a warrior, and his moccasins left the stain of blood. In his age he was wise. His words at the council fire did not blow away with the winds. Ah, he has abandoned that vain relic of paganism, his songs," cried the divine. "What says he now? Is he sensible of his lost state?" "Lord, man," said Natty, "he knows his end is at hand as well as you or I; but so far from thinking it a loss, he believes it to be a great gain. He is old and stiff, and you have made the game so scarce and shy that better shots than him find it hard to get a livelihood. Now he thinks he shall travel where it will always be good hunting, where no wicked or unjust Indians can go, and where he shall meet all his tribe together again. There's not much loss in that, to a man whose hands are hardly fit for basket making. Loss! If there be any loss, 'twill be to me. I'm sure after he's gone there will be but little left for me but to follow." "His example and end, which I humbly trust shall yet be made glorious," returned Mr. Grant, "should lead your mind to dwell on the things of another life. But I feel it to be my duty to smooth the way for the parting spirit. This is the moment, John, when the reflection that you did not reject the mediation of the Redeemer will bring balm to your soul. Trust not to any act of former days, but lay the burden of your sins at his feet, and you have his own blessed assurance that he will not desert you." "Though all you say be true, and you have Scripture gospels for it, too," said Natty, "you will make nothing of the Indian. He hasn't seen a Moravian sin the war, and it's hard to keep them from going back to their native ways. I should think 'twould be as well to let the old man pass in peace. He's happy now. I know it by his eye, and that's more than I would say for the chiefs, in the time the Delawares broke up from the headwaters of their river and went west. Ah's me! 'Tis a grievous long time, that, and many dark days have we seen together sin it." "Hawkeye," said Mohegan, rousing with the last glimmering of life, "Hawkeye, listen to the words of your brother." "Yes, John," said the hunter in English, strongly affected by the appeal, and drawing to his side, "we have been brothers, and more so than it means in the Indian tongue. What would ye have with me, Chingachgook?" "Hawkeye, my fathers call me to the happy hunting grounds. The path is clear, and the eyes of Mohegan grow young. I look, but I see no white skins. There are none to be seen but just and brave Indians. Farewell, Hawkeye. You shall go with the Fire Eater and the Young Eagle to the white man's heaven, but I go after my fathers. Let the bow, and tomahawk, and pipe, and the wampum of Mohegan be laid in his grave, for when he starts 'twill be in the night, like a warrior on a war party, and he cannot stop to seek them." "What says he, Nathaniel?" cried Mr. Grant, earnestly and with obvious anxiety. "Does he recall the promises of the mediation, and trust his salvation to the Rock of Ages?" Although the faith of the hunter was by no means clear, yet the fruits of early instruction had not entirely fallen in the wilderness. He believed in one God, and one heaven, and when the strong feeling excited by the leave-taking of his old companion, which was exhibited by the powerful working of every muscle in his weather-beaten face, suffered him to speak, he replied, "No, no. He trusts only to the Great Spirit of the savages, and to his own good deeds. He thinks, like all his people, that he is to be young again, and to hunt, and be happy to the end of eternity. It's pretty much the same with all colors, parson. I could never bring myself to think that I shall meet with these hounds, or my peace, in another world, though the thought of leaving them forever sometimes brings hard feelings over me, and makes me cling to life with a greater craving than beseems 70. The Lord in his mercy avert such a death from one who has been sealed with the sign of the cross," cried the minister, in holy fervor. "John!" He paused for the elements. During the period occupied by the events which we have related, the dark clouds in the horizon had continued to increase in numbers and multitude, and the awful stillness that now pervaded the air announced a crisis in the state of the atmosphere. The flames, which yet continued to rage along the sides of the mountains, no longer whirled in uncertain currents of their own eddies, but blazed high and steadily toward the heavens. There was even a quietude in the ravages of the destructive element, as if it foresaw that a hand greater than even its own desolating power was about to stay its progress. The piles of smoke which lay above the valley began to rise, and were dispelling rapidly, and streaks of livid lightning were dancing through the masses of clouds that impended over the western hills. While Mr. Grant was speaking, a flash, which sent its quivering light through the gloom, laying bare the whole opposite horizon, was followed by a loud crash of thunder, that rolled away among the hills, seeming to shake the foundations of the earth to their centre. Mohegan raised himself, as if in obedience to a signal for his departure, and stretched his wasted arm toward the west, his dark face lighted with a look of joy, which, with all other expressions, gradually disappeared, the muscles stiffening as they retreated to a state of rest. A slight convulsion played, for a single instant, about his lips, and his arm slowly dropped by his side, leaving the frame of the dead warrior reposing against the rock, with its glassy eyes open, and fixed on the distant hills, as if the deserted shell were tracing the flight of the spirit to its new abode. All this Mr. Grant witnessed in silent awe. But when the last echoes of the thunder died away, he clasped his hands together with pious energy, and repeated in the full, rich tones of assured faith: "Lord, how unsearchable are thy judgments, and thy ways past finding out! I know that my Redeemer liveth, and that he shall stand at the latter day upon the earth, and though after my skin worms destroy this body, yet in my flesh shall I see God, whom I shall see for myself, and mine eyes shall behold, and not another." As the divine closed this burst of devotion, he bowed his head meekly to his bosom, and looked all the dependence and humility that the inspired language expressed. When Mr. Grant retired from the body, the hunter approached, and taking the rigid hand of his friend, looked him wistfully in the face for some time without speaking, when he gave vent to his feelings by saying in the mournful voice of one who felt deeply: "Red-skin or white, it's all over now. He's to be judged by a righteous judge, and by no laws that's made to suit times and new ways. Well, there's only one more death, and the world will be left to me and the hounds. Ah's me! A man must wait the time of God's pleasure, but I begin to weary of life. There is scarcely a tree standing that I know, and it's hard to find a face that I was acquainted with in my younger days." Large drops of rain now began to fall, and diffuse themselves over the dry rock, while the approach of the thunder shower was rapid and certain. The body of the Indian was hastily removed into the cave beneath, followed by the whining hounds, who missed and moaned for the look of intelligence that had always met their salutations to the chief. Edwards made some hasty and confused excuse for not taking Elizabeth into the same place, which was now completely closed in front with logs and bark, saying something that she hardly understood about its darkness, and the unpleasantness of being with the dead body. Miss Temple, however, found a sufficient shelter against the torrent of rain that fell, under the projection of a rock which overhung them, but long before the shower was over, the sounds of voices were heard below them crying aloud for Elizabeth, and men soon appeared beating the dying embers of the bushes as they worked their way cautiously among the unextinguished brands. At the first short cessation in the rain, Oliver conducted Elizabeth to the road, where he left her. Before parting, however, he found time to say, in a fervent manner that his companion was now at no loss to interpret: "The moment of concealment is over, Miss Temple. By this time tomorrow I shall remove a veil that perhaps it has been weakness to keep around me and my alias so long. But I have had romantic and foolish wishes and weakness, and who has not, that is young and torn by conflicting passions? God bless you! I hear your father's voice. He is coming up the road, and I would not just now subject myself to detention. Thank Heaven you are safe again. That alone removes the weight of a world from my spirit." He waited for no answer, but sprang into the woods. Elizabeth, notwithstanding she heard the cries of her father as he called upon her name, paused until he was concealed among the smoking trees, when she turned, and in a moment rushed into the arms of her half-distracted parent. A carriage had been provided, into which Miss Temple hastily entered. When the cry was passed along the hill that the lost one was found, and the people returned to the village wet and dirty, but elated with the thought that the daughter of their landlord had escaped from so horrid and untimely an end. Author's insertion. The probability of a fire in the woods similar to that here described has been questioned. The writer can only say that he once witnessed a fire in another part of New York that compelled a man to desert his wagon and horses in the highway, and in which the latter were destroyed. In order to estimate the probability of such an event, it is necessary to remember the effects of a long drought in that climate, and the abundance of dead wood which is found in a forest like that described. The fires in the American forests frequently rage to such an extent as to produce a sensible effect on the atmosphere at a distance of 50 miles. Houses, barns, and fences are quite commonly swept away in their course. End of chapter 38. Recording by Bill Borst. Chapter 39 of The Pioneers, or the Sources of the Susquehanna, a Descriptive Tale by James Fenimore Cooper. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Chapter 39. Selectar, unsheathe then our chief's scimitar. Tamburgi, thy larum gives promise of war. Ye mountains that see us descend to the shore, shall view us as victors, or view us no more. Byron. The heavy showers that prevailed during the remainder of the day completely stopped the progress of the flames, though glimmering fires were observed during the night on different parts of the hill, wherever there was a collection of fuel to feed the element. The next day, the woods for many miles were black and smoking, and were stripped of every vestige of brush and dead wood, but the pines and hemlocks still reared their heads proudly among the hills, and even the smaller trees of the forest retained a feeble appearance of life and vegetation. The many tongues of rumor were busy in exaggerating the miraculous escape of Elizabeth, and a report was generally credited that Mohegan had actually perished in the flames. This belief became confirmed, and was indeed rendered probable, when the direful intelligence reached the village that Jotham Riddel, the miner, was found in his hole, nearly dead with suffocation, and burnt to such a degree that no hopes were entertained of his life. The public attention became much alive to the events of the last few days, and just at this crisis the convicted counterfeiters took the hint from Natty, and on the night succeeding the fire found means to cut through their log prison also, and to escape unpunished. When this news began to circulate through the village, blended with the fate of Jotham, and the exaggerated and tortured reports of the events on the hill, the popular opinion was freely expressed as to the propriety of seizing such of the fugitives as remained within reach. Men talked of the cave as a secret receptacle of guilt, and as the rumor of ores and metals found its way into the confused medley of conjectures, counterfeiting, and everything else that was wicked and dangerous to the peace of society, suggested themselves to the busy fancies of the populace. While the public mind was in this feverish state, it was hinted that the wood had been set on fire by Edwards and the Leatherstocking, and that consequently they alone were responsible for the damages. This opinion soon gained ground, being most circulated by those who, by their own heedlessness, had caused the evil, and there was one irresistible burst of the common sentiment that an attempt should be made to punish the offenders. Richard was by no means deaf to this appeal, and by noon he set about in earnest to see the laws executed. Several stout young men were selected, and taken apart with an appearance of secrecy, where they received some important charge from the sheriff, immediately under the eyes, but far removed from the ears, of all in the village. Possessed of a knowledge of their duty, these youths hurried into the hills with a bustling manner, as if the fate of the world depended on their diligence, and, at the same time, with an air of mystery as great as if they were engaged on secret matters of the state. At 12 precisely a drum beat the long roll before the bold dragoon, and Richard appeared accompanied by Captain Hollister, who was clad in investments as commander of the Templeton Light Infantry, when the former demanded of the latter the aid of the posse comitatus in enforcing the laws of the country. We have not room to record the speeches of the two gentlemen on this occasion, but they are preserved in the columns of the little blue newspaper which is yet to be found on the file, and are said to be highly creditable to the legal formula of one of the parties, and to the military precision of the other. Everything had been previously arranged, and as the red-coated drummer continued to roll out his clattering notes, some 25 privates appeared in the ranks, and arranged themselves in the order of battle. As this corps was composed of volunteers, and was commanded by a man who had passed the first 35 years of his life in camps and garrisons, it was the non-parallel of military science in that country, and was confidently pronounced by the judicious part of the Templeton community to be equal in skill and appearance to any troops in the known world. In physical endowments they were certainly much superior. To this assertion there were but 3 dissenting voices, and 1 dissenting opinion. The opinion belonged to Marmaduke, who, however, saw no necessity for its promulgation. Of the voices, 1, and that a pretty loud one, came from the spouse of the commander himself, who frequently reproached her husband for condescending to lead such an irregular band of warriors, after he had filled the honorable station of sergeant major to a dashing corps of Virginia cavalry through much of the recent war. Another of these skeptical sentiments was invariably expressed by Mr. Pump, whenever the company paraded generally in some such terms as these, which were uttered with that sort of meekness that a native of the island of our forefathers is apt to assume when he condescends to praise the customs or character of her truant progeny. "It's mayhap that they knows summat about loading and firing, d'ye see? But as for working ship, why, a corporal's guard of the Boadishey's marines would back and fill on their quarters in such a manner as to surround and captivate them all in half a glass." As there was no one to deny this assertion, the marines of the Boadicea were held in a corresponding degree of estimation. The third unbeliever was Monsieur Le Quoi, who merely whispered to the sheriff that the corps was one of the finest he had ever seen, second only to the musketeers of Le Bois Louis. However, as Mrs. Hollister thought there was something like actual service in the present appearances, and was, in consequence, too busily engaged with certain preparations of her own to make her comments, as Benjamin was absent, and Monsieur Le Quoi too happy to find fault with anything, the corps escaped criticism and comparison altogether on this momentous day, when they certainly had greater need of self-confidence than on any other previous occasion. Marmaduke was said to be again closeted with Mr. Van der School, and no interruption was offered to the movements of the troops. At 2 o'clock precisely the corps shouldered arms, beginning on the right wing, next to the veteran, and carrying the motion through to the left with great regularity. When each musket was quietly fixed in its proper situation, the order was given to wheel to the left and march. As this was bringing raw troops at once to face their enemy, it is not to be supposed that the maneuver was executed with their usual accuracy; but as the music struck up the inspiring air of Yankee Doodle, and Richard, accompanied by Mr. Doolittle, preceded the troops boldly down the street, Captain Hollister led on, with his head elevated to 45 degrees, with a little low-cocked hat perched on his crown, carrying a tremendous dragoon saber at a poise, and trailing at his heels a huge steel scabbard, that had war in its very clattering. There was a good deal of difficulty in getting all the platoons (there were 6) to look the same way, but by the time they reached the defile of the bridge, the troops were in sufficiently compact order. In this manner they marched up the hill to the summit of the mountain, no other alteration taking place in the disposition of the forces, excepting that a mutual complaint was made, by the sheriff and the magistrate, of a failure in wind, which gradually brought these gentlemen to the rear. It will be unnecessary to detail the minute movements that succeeded. We shall briefly say that the scouts came in and reported that, so far from retreating, as had been anticipated, the fugitives had evidently gained a knowledge of the attack, and were fortifying for a desperate resistance. This intelligence certainly made a material change, not only in the plans of the leaders, but in the countenances of the soldiery also. The men looked at one another with serious faces, and Hiram and Richard began to consult together, apart. At this conjuncture they were joined by Billy Kirby, who came along the highway with his axe under his arm, as much in advance of his team as Captain Hollister had been of his troops in the ascent. The woodchopper was amazed at the military array, but the sheriff eagerly availed himself of this powerful reinforcement, and commanded his assistance in putting the laws in force. Billy held Mr. Jones in too much deference to object, and it was finally arranged that he should be the bearer of a summons to the garrison to surrender before they proceeded to extremities. The troops now divided, one party being led by the captain over the vision, and were brought in on the left of the cave, while the remainder advanced upon its right, under the orders of the lieutenant. Mr. Jones and Dr. Todd, for the surgeon was in attendance also, appeared on the platform of rock, immediately over the heads of the garrison, though out of their sight. Hiram thought this approaching too near, and he therefore accompanied Kirby along the side of the hill to within a safe distance of the fortifications, where he took shelter behind a tree. Most of the men discovered great accuracy of eye in bringing some object in range between them and their enemy, and the only two of the besiegers, who were left in plain sight of the besieged, were Captain Hollister on one side, and the woodchopper on the other. The veteran stood up boldly to the front, supporting his heavy sword in one undeviating position, with his eye fixed firmly on his enemy, while the huge form of Billy was placed in that kind of quiet repose, with either hand thrust into his bosom, bearing his axe under his right arm, which permitted him, like his own oxen, to rest standing. So far, not a word had been exchanged between the belligerents. The besieged had drawn together a pile of black logs and branches of trees, which they had formed into a chevaux de frise, making a little circular abatis in front of the entrance to the cave. As the ground was steep and slippery in every direction around the place, and Benjamin appeared behind the works on one side, and Natty on the other, the arrangement was by no means contemptible, especially as the front was sufficiently guarded by the difficulty of the approach. By this time Kirby had received his orders, and he advanced coolly along the mountain, picking his way with the same indifference as if he were pursuing his ordinary business. When he was within 100 feet of the works, the long and much dreaded rifle of the Leatherstocking was seen issuing from the parapet, and his voice cried aloud: "Keep off, Billy Kirby! Keep off! I wish ye no harm, but if a man of ye all comes a step nigher, there'll be blood spilt atwixt us. God forgive the one that draws it first, but so it must be." "Come, old chap," said Billy good-naturedly, "don't be crabbed, but hear what a man has got to say. I've no concern in the business, only to see right twixt man and man, and I don't keer the valley of a beetle ring, which gets the better. But there's Squire Doolittle, yonder, behind the beech sapling. He has invited me to come in and ask you to give up to the law. That's all. I see the varmint. I see his clothes," cried the indignant Natty, "and if he'll only show so much flesh as will bury a rifle bullet, 30 to the pound, I'll make him feel me. Go away, Billy, I bid ye. You know my aim, and I bear you no malice." "You overcalculate your aim, Natty," said the other, as he stepped behind a pine that stood near him. "If you think to shoot a man through a tree with a 3-foot butt, I can lay this tree right across you in 10 minutes, by any man's watch, and in less time, too. so be civil. I want no more than what's right." There was a simple seriousness in the countenance of Natty that showed he was much in earnest, but it was also evident that he was reluctant to shed human blood. He answered the taunt of the woodchopper by saying, "I know you drop a tree where you will, Billy Kirby, but if you show a hand or an arm in doing it, there'll be bones to be set, and blood to staunch. If it's only to get into the cave that you want, wait till a 2 hours' sun, and you may enter it in welcome. But come in now you shall not. There's one dead body already, lying on the cold rocks, and there's another in which the life can hardly be said to stay. If you will come in, they'll be dead without as well as within." The woodchopper stepped out fearlessly from his cover, and cried, "That's fair, and what's fair is right. He wants you to stop till it's 2 hours to sundown, and I see reason in the thing. A man can give up when he's wrong, if you don't crowd him too hard. But you crowd a man, and he gets to be like a stubborn ox. The more you beat, the worse he kicks." The sturdy notions of independence maintained by Billy neither suited the emergency nor the impatience of Mr. Jones, who was burning with a desire to examine the hidden mysteries of the cave. He therefore interrupted this amicable dialogue with his own voice. "I command you, Nathaniel Bumppo, by my authority, to surrender your person to the law," he cried. "And I command you, gentlemen, to aid me in performing my duty. Benjamin Penguillan, I arrest you, and order you to follow me to the jail of the county, by virtue of this warrant." "I'd follow you, Squire Dickens," said Benjamin, removing the pipe from his mouth, for during the whole scene the ex-major domo had been very composedly smoking. "Ay, I'd sail in your wake to the end of the world, if so be that there was such a place, where there isn't, seeing that it's round. Now, mayhap, Master Hollister, having lived all your life on shore, you isn't acquainted with that world, d'ye see?" "Surrender!" interrupted the veteran, in a voice that startled his hearers, and which actually caused his own forces to recoil several paces. "Surrender, Benjamin Penguillan, or expect no quarter." "Damn your quarter!" said Benjamin, rising from the log on which he was seated, and taking a squint along the barrel of the swivel which had been brought on the hill during the night, and now formed the means of defence on his side of the works. "Look you, master, or captain, though I questions if you know the name of a rope, except the one that's to hang ye, there's no need of singing out as if you was hailing a deaf man on a topgallant yard. Mayhap you think you've got my true name in your sheepskin, but what British sailor finds it worth while to sail in these seas without a sham on his stern, in case of need, d'ye see? If you call me Penguillan, you calls me by the name of the man on whose hand, d'ye see, I hove into daylight, and he was a gentleman, and that's more than my worst enemy will say of any of the family of Benjamin Stubbs. Send the warrant round to me, and I'll put in an alias," cried Hiram, from behind his cover. "Put in a jackass, and you'll put in yourself, Mr. Do-but-little," shouted Benjamin, who kept squinting along his little iron tube with great steadiness. "I give you but one moment to yield," cried Richard. "Benjamin, Benjamin, this is not the gratitude I expected from you." "I tell you, Richard Jones," said Natty, who dreaded the sheriff's influence over his comrade, "though the canister the gal brought be lost, there's powder enough in the cave to lift the rock you stand on. I'll take off my roof if you don't hold your peace." "I think it beneath the dignity of my office to parley further with the prisoners," the sheriff observed to his companion, while they both retired with a precipitancy that Captain Hollister mistook for the signal to advance. "Charge bayonet!" shouted the veteran. "March!" Although this signal was certainly expected, it took the assailed a little by surprise, and the veteran approached the works, crying, Courage, my brave lads! Give them no quarter unless they surrender!" and struck a furious blow upward with his saber, that would have divided the steward into moieties by subjecting him to the process of decapitation, but for the fortunate interference of the muzzle of the swivel. As it was, the gun was dismounted at the critical moment that Benjamin was applying his pipe to the priming, and in consequence some 5 or 6 dozen of rifle bullets were projected into the air in nearly a perpendicular line. Philosophy teaches us that the atmosphere will not retain lead, and 2 pounds of the metal, molded into bullets of 30 to the pound, after describing an ellipsis in their journey, returned to the earth, rattling among the branches of the trees directly over the heads of the troops stationed in the rear of their captain. Much of the success of an attack, made by irregular soldiers, depends on the direction in which they are first got in motion. In the present instance it was retrograde, and in less than a minute after the bellowing report of the swivel among the rocks and caverns, the whole weight of the attack from the left rested on the prowess of the single arm of the veteran. Benjamin received a severe contusion from the recoil of his gun, which produced a short stupor, during which period the ex-steward was prostrate on the ground. Captain Hollister availed himself of this circumstance to scramble over the breastwork and obtain a footing in the bastion, for such was the nature of the fortress as connected with the cave. The moment the veteran found himself within the works of his enemy, he rushed to the edge of the fortification, and waving his saber over his head, shouted, "Victory! Come on, my brave boys! The work's our own!" All this was perfectly military, and was such an example as a gallant officer was in some measure bound to exhibit to his men, but the outcry was the unlucky cause of turning the tide of success. Natty, who had been keeping a vigilant eye on the wood chopper, and the enemy immediately before him, wheeled at this alarm, and was appalled at beholding his comrade on the ground, and the veteran standing on his own bulwark, giving forth the cry of victory. The muzzle of the long rifle was turned instantly toward the captain. There was a moment when the life of the old soldier was in great jeopardy, but the object to shoot at was both too large and too near for the Leatherstocking, who, instead of pulling his trigger, applied the gun to the rear of his enemy, and by a powerful shove sent him outside of the works with much greater rapidity than he had entered them. The spot on which Captain Hollister alighted was directly in front, where, as his feet touched the ground, so steep and slippery was the side of the mountain, it seemed to recede from under them. His motion was swift, and so irregular as utterly to confuse the faculties of the old soldier. During its continuance he supposed himself to be mounted, and charging through the ranks of his enemy. At every tree he made a blow, of course, as at a foot soldier, and just as he was making the cut St. George at a half-burnt sapling, he landed in the highway, and to his utter amazement at the feet of his own spouse. When Mrs. Hollister, who was toiling up the hill, followed by at least 20 curious boys, leaning with one hand on the staff with which she ordinarily walked, and bearing in the other an empty bag, witnessed this exploit of her husband, indignation immediately got the better, not only of her religion, but of her philosophy. "Why, Sergeant, is it flyin' ye are?" she cried, "that I should live to see a husband of mine turn his back to an enemy, and such a one? Here I have been tellin' the boys, as we come along, all about the siege of Yorktown, and how ye was hurted, and how ye'd be acting the same ag'in the day, and I met ye retraiting just as the first gun is fired. Och, I may trow away the bag, for if there's plunder, 'twill not be the wife of sich as yourself that will be privileged to be getting the same. They do say, too, there is a power of gold and silver in the place. The Lord forgive me for setting my heart on worldly things, but what falls in the battle, there's Scripture for believin', is just the property of the victor." "Retreating!" exclaimed the amazed veteran. "Where's my horse? He has been shot under me. Is the man mad?" interrupted his wife. "Devil the horse do ye own, Sergeant, and you're nothing but a shabby captain of Malaishy. Oh, if the ra'al captain was here! 'Tis the other way ye'd be riding, dear. or you would not follow your lader." While this worthy couple were thus discussing events, the battle began to rage more violently than ever above them. When Leatherstocking saw his enemy fairly under headway, as Benjamin would express it, he gave his attention to the right wing of the assailants. It would have been easy for Kirby, with his powerful frame, to have seized the moment to scale the bastion, and, with his great strength, to have sent both of its defenders in pursuit of the veteran. But hostility appeared to be the passion that the wood chopper indulged the least in at that moment, for in a voice that was heard by the retreating left wing, he shouted: "Hurrah! Well done, captain! Keep it up! How he handles his bush hook! He makes nothing of a sapling!" and such other encouraging exclamations to the flying veteran, until, overcome by mirth, the good-natured fellow seated himself on the ground, kicking the earth with delight, and giving vent to peal after peal of laughter. Natty stood all this time in a menacing attitude, with his rifle pointed over the breastwork, watching with a quick and cautious eye the least movement of the assailants. The outcry unfortunately tempted the ungovernable curiosity of Hiram to take a peep from behind his cover at the state of the battle. Though this evolution was performed with great caution, in protecting his front, he left, like many a better commander, his rear exposed to the attacks of his enemy. Mr. Doolittle belonged physically to a class of his countrymen to whom nature has denied, in their formation, the use of curved lines. Everything about him was either straight or angular. But his tailor was a woman who worked like a regimental contractor, by a set of rules that gave the same configuration to the whole human species. Consequently, when Mr. Doolittle leaned forward in the manner described, a loose drapery appeared behind the tree, at which the rifle of Natty was pointed with the quickness of lightning. A less experienced man would have aimed at the flowing robe, which hung like a festoon half-way to the earth. But the Leatherstocking knew both the man and his female tailor better, and when the smart report of the rifle was heard, Kirby, who watched the whole maneuver in breathless expectation, saw the bark fly from the beech, and the cloth, at some distance above the loose folds, wave at the same instant. No battery was ever unmasked with more promptitude than Hiram advanced from behind the tree at this summons. He made 2 or 3 steps with great precision to the front, and, placing one hand on the afflicted part, stretched forth the other with a menacing air toward Natty, and cried aloud: "God darn ye, this shan't be settled so easy. I'll follow it up from the Commons Pleas to the Court of Errors." Such a shocking imprecation, from the mouth of so orderly a man as Squire Doolittle, with the fearless manner in which he exposed himself, together with perhaps the knowledge that Natty's rifle was unloaded, encouraged the troops in the rear, who gave a loud shout, and fired a volley into the tree-tops, after the contents of the swivel. Animated by their own noise, the men now rushed on in earnest, and Billy Kirby, who thought the joke, good as it was, had gone far enough, was in the act of scaling the works, when Judge Temple appeared on the opposite side, exclaiming: "Silence and peace! Why do I see murder and bloodshed attempted? Is not the law sufficient to protect itself, that armed bands must be gathered, as in rebellion and war, to see justice performed?" "'Tis the posse comitatus," shouted the sheriff, from a distant rock. "Who say rather a posse of demons. I command the peace." "Hold, shed not blood," cried a voice from the top of the vision. "Hold, for the sake of heaven, fire no more. All shall be yielded. You shall enter the cave." Amazement produced the desired effect. Natty, who had reloaded his piece, quietly seated himself on the logs, and rested his head on his hands, while the light infantry ceased their military movements and waited the issue in suspense. In less than a minute Edwards came rushing down the hill, followed by Major Hartmann, with a velocity that was surprising for his years. They reached the terrace in an instant, from which the youth led the way, by the hollow in the rock, to the mouth of the cave, into which they both entered, leaving all without silent, and gazing after them with astonishment. End of chapter 39. Recording by Bill Borst. Chapter 40 of The Pioneers, or the Sources of the Susquehanna, a Descriptive Tale by James Fenimore Cooper. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information, or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Chapter 40. I am dumb. Were you the doctor, and I knew you not? Shakespeare. During the 5 or 6 minutes that elapsed before the youth and Major reappeared, Judge Temple and the sheriff, together with most of the volunteers, ascended to the terrace, where the latter began to express their conjectures of the result, and to recount their individual services in the conflict. But the sight of the peacemakers ascending the ravine shut every mouth. On a rude chair, covered with undressed deerskins, they supported a human being, whom they seated carefully and respectfully in the midst of the assembly. His head was covered by long smooth locks of the color of snow. His dress, which was studiously neat and clean, was composed of such fabrics as none but the wealthiest classes wear, but was threadbare and patched, and on his feet were placed a pair of moccasins, ornamented in the best manner of Indian ingenuity. The outlines of his face were grave and dignified, though his vacant eye, which opened and turned slowly to the faces of those around him in unmeaning looks, too surely announced that the period had arrived when age brings the mental imbecility of childhood. Natty had followed the supporters of this unexpected object to the top of the cave, and took his station at a little distance behind him, leaning on his rifle in the midst of his pursuers, with a fearlessness that showed that heavier interests than those which affected himself were to be decided. Major Hartmann placed himself beside the aged man, uncovered, with his whole soul beaming through those eyes which so commonly danced with frolic and humor. Edwards rested with one hand familiarly but affectionately on the chair, though his heart was swelling with emotions that denied him utterance. All eyes were gazing intently, but each tongue continued mute. At length the decrepit stranger, turning his vacant looks from face to face, made a feeble attempt to rise, while a faint smile crossed his wasted face, like an habitual effort at courtesy, as he said, in a hollow, tremulous voice, "Be pleased to be seated, gentlemen. The council will open immediately. Each one who loves a good and virtuous king will wish to see these colonies continue loyal. Be seated, I pray you. Be seated, gentlemen. The troops shall halt for the night." "This is the wandering of insanity," said Marmaduke. "Who will explain this scene?" "No, sir," said Edwards firmly, "'tis only the decay of nature. Who is answerable for its pitiful condition remains to be shown." "Will the gentleman dine with us, my son?" said the old stranger, turning to a voice that he both knew and loved. "Order a repast suitable for his Majesty's officers. You know we have the best of game always at command." "Who is this man?" asked Marmaduke, in a hurried voice, in which the dawnings of conjecture united with interest to put the question. "This man," returned Edwards calmly, his voice, however, gradually rising as he proceeded, "this man, sir, whom you behold hid in caverns, and deprived of everything that can make life desirable, was once the companion and counselor of those who ruled your country. This man, whom you see helpless and feeble, was once a warrior, so brave and fearless that even the intrepid natives gave him the name of the Fire Eater. This man, whom you now see destitute of even the ordinary comfort of a cabin, in which to shelter his head, was once the owner of great riches, and, Judge Temple, he was the rightful proprietor of this very soil on which we stand. This man was the father of—" "This, then," cried Marmaduke, with a powerful emotion, "this, then, is the lost Major Effingham." "Lost, indeed," said the youth, fixing a piercing eye on the other. And you," continued the Judge, articulating with difficulty, "I am his grandson." A minute passed in profound silence. All eyes were fixed on the speakers, and even the old German appeared to wait the issue in deep anxiety. But the moment of agitation soon passed. Marmaduke raised his head from his bosom, where it had sunk, not in shame, but in devout mental thanksgivings, and, as large tears fell over his fine, manly face, he grasped the hand of the youth warmly, and said, "Oliver, I forgive all thy harshness, all thy suspicions. I now see it all. I forgive thee everything, but suffering this aged man to dwell in such a place, when not only my habitation, but my fortune were at his and thy command." "He's true as ter steel," shouted Major Hartmann. "Didn't I tell you, lad, dat Marmaduke Temple was a friend dat would never fail in ter dime of need?" "It is true, Judge Temple, that my opinions of your conduct have been staggered by what this worthy gentleman has told me. When I found it impossible to convey my grandfather back whence the enduring love of this old man brought him, without detection and exposure, I went to the Mohawk in quest of one of his former comrades, in whose justice I had dependence. He is your friend, Judge Temple, but, if what he says be true, both my father and myself may have judged you harshly." "You name your father," said Marmaduke tenderly. "Was he indeed lost in the packet?" "He was. He had left me, after several years of fruitless application and comparative poverty, in Nova Scotia, to obtain the compensation for his losses which the British commissioners had at length awarded. After spending a year in England, he was returning to Halifax, on his way to a government to which he had been appointed in the West Indies, intending to go to the place where my grandfather had sojourned during and since the war, and take him with us." "But thou," said Marmaduke, with powerful interest, "I had thought that thou hadst perished with him." A flush passed over the cheeks of the young man, who gazed about him at the wondering faces of the volunteers, and continued silent. Marmaduke turned to the veteran captain, who just then rejoined his command, and said, "March thy soldiers back again, and dismiss them. The zeal of the sheriff has much mistaken his duty. Dr. Todd, I will thank you to attend to the injury which Hiram Doolittle has received in this untoward affair. Richard, you will oblige me by sending up the carriage to the top of the hill. Benjamin, return to your duty in my family." Unwelcome as these orders were to most of the auditors, the suspicion that they had somewhat exceeded the wholesome restraints of the law, and the habitual respect with which all the commands of the judge were received, induced a prompt compliance. When they were gone, and the rock was left to the parties most interested in an explanation, Marmaduke, pointing to the aged Major Effingham, said to his grandson, "Had we not better remove thy parent from this open place until my carriage can arrive?" "Pardon me, sir, the air does him good, and he has taken it whenever there was no dread of a discovery. I know not how to act, Judge Temple. Ought I? Can I suffer Major Effingham to become an inmate of your family?" "Thou shalt be thyself the judge," said Marmaduke. "Thy father was my early friend. He entrusted his fortune to my care. When we separated, he had such confidence in me that he wished no security, no evidence of the trust, even had there been time or convenience for exacting it. This thou hast heard?" "Most truly, sir," said Edwards, or rather Effingham, as we must now call him. "We differed in politics. If the cause of this country was successful, the trust was sacred with me, for none knew of thy father's interest. If the crown still held its sway, it would be easy to restore the property of so loyal a subject as Colonel Effingham. Is not this plain?" "The premises are good, sir," continued the youth, with the same incredulous look as before. "Listen, listen, poy," said the German. "There is not a hair as of ter rogue in ter het of Herr Juge." "We all know the issue of the struggle," continued Marmaduke, disregarding both. "Thy grandfather was left in Connecticut, regularly supplied by thy father with the means of such a subsistence as suited his wants. This I well knew, though I never had intercourse with him, even in our happiest days. Thy father retired with the troops to prosecute his claims on England. At all events, his losses must be great, for his real estates were sold, and I became the lawful purchaser. It was not unnatural to wish that he might have no bar to its just recovery. There was none, but the difficulty of providing for so many claimants. But there would have been one, and an insuperable one, and I announced to the world that I held these estates, multiplied by the times and my industry, 100-fold in value, only as his trustee. Thou knowest that I supplied him with considerable sums immediately after the war. You did, until my letters were returned unopened. Thy father had much of thy own spirit, Oliver. He was sometimes hasty and rash. The judge continued in a self-condemning manner. Perhaps my fault lies the other way. I may possibly look too far ahead and calculate too deeply. It certainly was a severe trial to allow the man whom I most loved to think ill of me for 7 years, in order that he might honestly apply for his just remunerations. But had he opened my last letters, thou wouldst have learned the whole truth. Those I sent him to England, by what my agent writes me, he did read. He died, Oliver, knowing all. He died my friend, and I thought thou hadst died with him. Our poverty would not permit us to pay for 2 passages, said the youth, with the extraordinary emotion with which he ever alluded to the degraded state of his family. I was left in the province to wait for his return, and when the sad news of his loss reached me, I was nearly penniless. "And what didst thou, boy?" asked Marmaduke in a faltering voice. "I took my passage here in search of my grandfather, for I well knew that his resources were gone, with the half-pay of my father. On reaching his abode, I learned that he had left in secret, though the reluctant hireling, who had deserted him in his poverty, owned to my urgent entreaties that he believed he had been carried away by an old man, who had formerly been his servant. I knew at once it was Natty, for my father often—" "Was Natty a servant of thy grandfather?" exclaimed the judge. "Of that, too, were you ignorant?" said the youth in evident surprise. "How should I know it? I never met the Major, nor was the name of Bumppo ever mentioned to me. I knew him only as a man of the woods, and one who lived by hunting. Such men are too common to excite surprise." "He was reared in the family of my grandfather, served him for many years during their campaigns at the West, where he became attached to the woods, and he was left here as a kind of locum tenens on the lands that old Mohegan, whose life my grandfather once saved, induced the Delawares to grant to him when they admitted him as an honorary member of their tribe." "This, then, is thy Indian blood?" "I have no other," said Edward, smiling. "Major Effingham was adopted as the son of Mohegan, who at that time was the greatest man in his nation, and my father, who visited those people when a boy, received the name of the Eagle from them, on account of the shape of his face, as I understand. They have extended this title to me. I have no other Indian blood or breeding, though I have seen the hour, Judge Temple, when I could wish that such had been my lineage and education." "Proceed with thy tale," said Marmaduke. "I have but little more to say, sir. I followed to the lake where I had so often been told that Natty dwelt, and found him maintaining his old master in secret; for even he could not bear to exhibit to the world, in his poverty and dotage, a man whom a whole people once looked up to with respect." "And what did you?" "What did I? I spent my last money in purchasing a rifle, clad myself in a coarse garb, and learned to be a hunter by the side of Leatherstocking. You know the rest, Judge Temple." "And where was old Fritz Hartmann?" said the German reproachfully. "Didst never hear a name as of old Fritz Hartmann from der mouth of der fader, lad?" "I may have been mistaken, gentlemen," returned the youth, "but I had pride, and could not submit to such an exposure as this day even has reluctantly brought to light. I had plans that might have been visionary; but, should my parent survive till autumn, I proposed taking him with me to the city, where we have distant relatives, who must have learned to forget the Tory by this time. He decays rapidly," he continued mournfully, "and must soon lie by the side of old Mohegan." The air being pure, and the day fine, the party continued conversing on the rock, until the wheels of Judge Temple's carriage were heard clattering up the side of the mountain, during which time the conversation was maintained with deep interest, each moment clearing up some doubtful action, and lessening the antipathy of the youth to Marmaduke. He no longer objected to the removal of his grandfather, who displayed a childish pleasure when he found himself seated once more in a carriage. When placed in the ample hall of the mansion house, the eyes of the aged veteran turned slowly to the objects in the apartment, and a look like the dawn of intellect would, for moments, flit across his features, when he invariably offered some useless courtesies to those near him, wandering painfully in his subjects. The exercise and the change soon produced an exhaustion that caused them to remove him to his bed, where he lay for hours, evidently sensible of the change in his comforts, and exhibiting that mortifying picture of human nature, which too plainly shows that the propensities of the animal continue, even after the nobler part of the creature appears to have vanished. Until his parent was placed comfortably in bed, with Natty seated at his side, Effingham did not quit him. He then obeyed a summons to the library of the Judge, where he found the latter, with Major Hartmann, waiting for him. "Read this paper, Oliver," said Marmaduke to him as he entered, "and thou wilt find that, so far from intending thy family wrong during life, it has been my care to see that justice should be done at even a later day." The youth took the paper, which his first glance told him was the will of the Judge. Hurried and agitated as he was, he discovered that the date corresponded with the time of the unusual depression of Marmaduke. As he proceeded, his eyes began to moisten, and the hand which held the instrument shook violently. The will commenced with the usual forms, spun out by the ingenuity of Mr. Van der School; but after this subject was fairly exhausted, the pen of Marmaduke became plainly visible. In clear, distinct, manly, and even eloquent language, he recounted his obligations to Colonel Effingham, the nature of their connection, and the circumstances in which they separated. He then proceeded to relate the motives of his silence, mentioning, however, large sums that he had forwarded to his friend, which had been returned with the letters unopened. After this, he spoke of his search for the grandfather who unaccountably disappeared, and his fears that the direct heir of the trust was buried in the ocean with his father. After, in short, recounting in a clear narrative the events which our readers must now be able to connect, he proceeded to make a fair and exact statement of the sums left in his care by Colonel Effingham. A devise of his whole estate to certain responsible trustees followed, to hold the same for the benefit in equal moieties of his daughter, on one part, and of Oliver Effingham, formerly a major in the army of Great Britain, and of his son Edward Effingham, and of his son Edward Oliver Effingham, or to the survivor of them, and the descendants of such survivor, forever, on the other part. The trust was to endure until 1810, when, if no person appeared, or could be found, after sufficient notice, to claim the moiety so devised, then a certain sum, calculating the principal and interest of his debt to Colonel Effingham, was to be paid to the heirs at law of the Effingham family, and the bulk of his estate was to be conveyed in fee to his daughter or her heirs. The tears fell from the eyes of the young man as he read this undeniable testimony of the good faith of Marmaduke, and his bewildered gaze was fastened on the paper, when a voice that thrilled on every nerve spoke near him, saying, "Do you yet doubt us, Oliver?" "I have never doubted you," cried the youth, recovering his recollection and his voice, as he sprang to seize the hand of Elizabeth. "No, not one moment has my faith in you wavered." "And my father? God bless him!" "I thank thee, my son," said the Judge, exchanging a warm pressure of the hand with the youth. "But we have both erred. Thou hast been too hasty, and I have been too slow. One half of my estate shall be thine as soon as they can be conveyed to thee, and if what my suspicions tell me be true, I suppose the other must follow speedily." He took the hand which he held, and united it with that of his daughter, and motioned toward the door to the Major. "I telt yon vat, gal," said the old German good-humoredly, "if I vas as I vas ven I servet mit his grandfader on der lakes,
ter lazy tog shouldn't vin ter prizes for notin'."
"Come, come, old Fritz," said the judge, "you are 70, not 17. Richard waits for you with a bowl of eggnog in the hall."
"Richard! De devil!" exclaimed the other, hastening out of the room. "He makes ter nog as for ter horse. Vill show ter sheriff mit my own hands. Ter devil! I believe he sweetens mit ter Yankee molasses."
Marmaduke smiled and nodded affectionately at the young couple, and closed the door after them. If any of our readers expect that we are going to open it again for their gratification, they are mistaken. The tete-a-tete continued for a very unreasonable time. How long we shall not say. But it was ended by 6 o'clock in the evening, for at that hour Monsieur Le Quoi made his appearance agreeably to the appointment of the preceding day, and claimed the ear of Miss Temple. He was admitted, when he made an offer of his hand with much suavity, together with his ami spig and leet, his pere, his mère, and his sucre-bouche. Elizabeth might possibly have previously entered into some embarrassing and binding engagements with Oliver, for she declined the tender of all, in terms as polite, though perhaps a little more decided, than those in which they were made. The Frenchman soon joined the German and the sheriff in the hall, who compelled him to take a seat with them at the table, where, by the aid of punch, wine, and eggnog, they soon extracted from the complacent Monsieur Le Quoi the nature of his visit. It was evident that he had made the offer as a duty which a well-bred man owed to a lady in such a retired place, before he had left the country, and that his feelings were but very little, if at all, interested in the matter. After a few potations, the waggish pair persuaded the exhilarated Frenchman that there was an inexcusable partiality in offering to one lady, and not extending a similar courtesy to another. Consequently, about 9, Monsieur Le Quoi sallied forth to the rectory on a similar mission to Miss Grant, which proved as successful as his first effort in love. When he returned to the mansion house at 10, Richard and the Major were still seated at the table. They attempted to persuade the Gaul, as the sheriff called him, that he should next try Remarkable Pettibone; but, though stimulated by mental excitement and wine, 2 hours of abstruse logic were thrown away on this subject, for he declined their advice with a pertinacity truly astonishing in so polite a man. When Benjamin lighted Monsieur Le Quoi from the door, he said at parting: "If so be, monsieur, you'd run alongside Mistress Pettibones, as the Squire Dickens was bidding ye, 'tis my notion you'd have been grappled, in which case, d'ye see, ye might have been troubled in swinging clear again in a handsome manner. For though if Miss Lizzie and the parson's young un be tidy little vessels that shoot by a body on a wind, Mistress Remarkable is summat of a galliot fashion. When you once takes 'em in tow, they doesn't like to be cast off ag'in." End of chapter 40. Recording by Bill Borst. Chapter 41 of the Pioneers, or the Sources of the Susquehanna, a descriptive tale by James Fenimore Cooper. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Chapter 41. Yes, sweep ye on. We will not leave, for them who triumph those who grieve. With that armada gay be laughter loud and jocund shout, but with that skill abides the minstrel tale. Lord of the Isles. The events of our tale carry us through the summer, and after making nearly the circle of the year, we must conclude our labors in the delightful month of October. Many important incidents had, however, occurred in the intervening period, a few of which it may be necessary to recount. The two principal were the marriage of Oliver and Elizabeth, and the death of Major Effingham. They both took place early in September, and the former preceded the latter only a few days. The old man passed away like the last glimmering of a taper, and though his death cast a melancholy over the family, grief could not follow such an end. One of the chief concerns of Marmaduke was to reconcile the even conduct of a magistrate with the course that his feelings dictated to the criminals. The day succeeding the discovery at the cave, however, Natty and Benjamin re-entered the jail peaceably, where they continued, well fed and comfortable, until the return of an express to Albany, who brought the governor's pardon to the Leatherstocking. In the meantime, proper means were employed to satisfy Hiram for the assaults on his person, and on the same day the two comrades issued together into society again, with their characters not at all affected by the imprisonment. Mr. Doolittle began to discover that neither architecture nor his law was quite suitable to the growing wealth and intelligence of the settlement, and after exacting the last cent that was attainable in his compromise, to use the language of the country, he pulled up stakes, and proceeded farther west, scattering his professional science and legal learning through the land, vestiges of both of which are to be discovered there even to the present hour. Poor Jotham, whose life paid the forfeiture of his folly, acknowledged before he died that his reasons for believing in a mine were extracted from the lips of a sibyl, who by looking in a magic glass was enabled to discover the hidden treasures of the earth. Such superstition was frequent in the new settlements, and after the first surprise was over, the better part of the community forgot the subject. But at the same time that it removed from the breast of Richard a lingering suspicion of the acts of the three hunters, it conveyed a mortifying lesson to him, which brought many quiet hours, in future, to his cousin Marmaduke. It may be remembered that the sheriff confidently pronounced this to be no visionary scheme, and that word was enough to shut his lips, at any time within the next 10 years. Monsieur Le Quoi, who has been introduced to our readers because no picture of that country would be faithful without some such character, found the island of Martinique and his sucrebouche in possession of the English, but Marmaduke and his family were much gratified in soon hearing that he had returned to his bureau in Paris, where he afterward issued yearly bulletins of his happiness, and of his gratitude to his friends in America. With this brief explanation, we must return to our narrative. Let the American reader imagine one of our mildest October mornings, when the sun seems a ball of silvery fire, and the elasticity of the air is felt while it is inhaled, imparting vigor and life to the whole system. The weather, neither too warm nor too cold, but of that happy temperature which stirs the blood, without bringing the lassitude of spring. It was on such a morning, about the middle of the month, that Oliver entered the hall where Elizabeth was issuing her usual orders for the day, and requesting her to join him in a short excursion to the lake side. The tender melancholy in the manner of her husband caught the attention of Elizabeth, who instantly abandoned her concerns, threw a light shawl across her shoulders, and concealing her raven hair under a gypsy hat, took his arm and submitted herself, without a question, to his guidance. They crossed the bridge, and had turned from the highway along the margin of the lake before a word was exchanged. Elizabeth well knew by the direction the object of the walk, and respected the feelings of her companion too much to indulge in untimely conversation. But when they gained the open fields, and her eye roamed over the placid lake, covered with wild fowl, already journeying from the great northern waters to seek a warmer sun, but lingering to play in the limpid sheet of the Otsego, and to the sides of the mountain, which were gay with the thousand dyes of autumn, as if to grace their bridal, the swelling heart of the young wife burst out in speech. "This is not a time for silence, Oliver," she said, clinging more fondly to his arm. "Everything in nature seems to speak the praises of the Creator. Why should we, who have so much to be grateful for, be silent?" "Speak on," said her husband, smiling. "I love the sounds of your voice. You must anticipate our errand hither. I have told you my plans. How do you like them?" "I must first see them," returned his wife. "But I have had my plans, too. It is time I should begin to divulge them." "You! It is something for the comfort of my old friend Natty, I know." "Certainly of Natty. But we have other friends besides the Leatherstocking to serve. Do you forget Louisa and her father?" "No, surely. Have I not given one of the best farms in the county to the good divine? As for Louisa, I should wish you to keep her always near us." "You do," said Elizabeth, slightly compressing her lips. "But poor Louisa may have other views for herself. She may wish to follow my example, and marry." "I don't think it," said Effingham, musing a moment. I really don't know any one hereabouts good enough for her." "Perhaps not her, but there are other places besides Templeton, and other churches besides New St. Paul's." "Churches, Elizabeth! You would not wish to lose Mr. Grant, surely? Though simple, he is an excellent man. I shall never find another who has half the veneration for my orthodoxy. You would humble me from a saint to a very common sinner." "It must be done, sir," returned the lady, with a half-concealed smile, "though it degrades you from an angel to a man." "But you forget the farm?" "He can lease it, as others do. Besides, would you have a clergyman toil in the fields?" "Where can he go? You forget Louisa." "No, I do not forget Louisa," said Elizabeth, again compressing her beautiful lips. "You know, Effingham, that my father has told you that I ruled him, and that I should rule you. I am now about to exert my power." "Anything, anything, dear Elizabeth, but not at the expense of us all, not at the expense of your friend." "How do you know, sir, that it will be so much at the expense of my friend?" said the lady, fixing her eyes with a searching look on his countenance, where they met only the unsuspecting expression of manly regret. "How do I know it? Why, it is natural that she should regret us." "It is our duty to struggle with our natural feelings," returned the lady, "and there is but little cause to fear that such a spirit as Louisa's will not effect it." "But what is your plan?" "Listen, and you shall know. My father has procured a call for Mr. Grant to one of the towns on the Hudson, where he can live more at his ease than in journeying through these woods; where he can spend the evening of his life in comfort and quiet; and where his daughter may meet with such society and form such a connection as may be proper for one of her years and character." "Bess, you amaze me. I did not think you had been such a manager." "Oh, I manage more deeply than you imagine, sir," said the wife, archly smiling again. "But it is thy will, and it is your duty to submit, for a time at least." Effingham laughed; but as they approached the end of their walk, the subject was changed by common consent. The place at which they arrived was the little spot of level ground where the cabin of the Leatherstocking had so long stood. Elizabeth found it entirely cleared of rubbish, and beautifully laid down in turf, by the removal of sods, which, in common with the surrounding country, had grown gay under the influence of profuse showers, as if a second spring had passed over the land. This little place was surrounded by a circle of mason work, and they entered by a small gate, near which, to the surprise of both, the rifle of Natty was leaning against the wall. Hector and the slut reposed on the grass by its side, as if conscious that, however altered, they were lying on the ground, and were surrounded by objects with which they were familiar. The hunter himself was stretched on the earth, before a headstone of white marble, pushing aside, with his fingers, the long grass that had already sprung up from the luxuriant soil around its base, apparently to lay bare the inscription. By the side of this stone, which was a simple slab at the head of a grave, stood a rich monument, decorated with an urn and ornamented with the chisel. Oliver and Elizabeth approached the graves with a light tread, unheard by the old hunter, whose sunburnt face was working, and whose eyes twinkled as if something impeded their vision. After some little time Natty raised himself slowly from the ground, and said aloud: "Well, well, I'm bold to say it's all right. There's something that I suppose is reading, but I can't make anything of it, though the pipe and the tomahawk and the moccasins be pretty well for a man that, I dares to say, never seed either of the things. Ah's me! There they lie, side by side, happy enough. Who will there be to put me in the arth when my time comes?" "When that unfortunate hour arrives, Natty, friends shall not be wanting to perform the last offices for you," said Oliver, a little touched at the hunter's soliloquy. The old man turned, without manifesting surprise, for he had got the Indian habits in this particular, and, running his hand under the bottom of his nose, seemed to wipe away his sorrow with the action. "You've come out to see the graves, children, have ye?" he said. "Well, well, they're wholesome sights to young as well as old." "I hope they are fitted to your liking," said Effingham. "No one has a better right than yourself to be consulted in the matter." "Why, seeing that I ain't used to fine graves," returned the old man, It is but little matter consarning my taste. Ye laid the Major's head to the west, and Mohegan's to the east, did ye, lad? At your request it was done." "It's so best," said the hunter. "They thought they had to journey different ways, children, though there is one greater than all, who will bring the just together, at his own time, and who will whiten the skin of a blackamoor, and place him on a footing with princes." "There is but little reason to doubt that," said Elizabeth, whose decided tones were changed to a soft, melancholy voice. "I trust we shall all meet again, and be happy together." "Shall we, child, shall we?" exclaimed the hunter with unusual fervor. "There's comfort in that thought, too. But before I go, I should like to know what 'tis you tell these people that be flocking into the country like pigeons in the spring, of the old Delaware, and of the bravest white man that ever trod the hills." Effingham and Elizabeth were surprised at the manner of the Leatherstocking, which was unusually impressive and solemn, but attributing it to the scene, the young man turned to the monument and read aloud: "Sacred to the memory of Oliver Effingham, Esquire, formerly a major in his B. Majesty's 60th foot, a soldier of tried valor, a subject of chivalrous loyalty, and a man of honesty. To these values he added the graces of a Christian. The morning of his life was spent in honor, wealth, and power, but its evening was obscured by poverty, neglect, and disease, which were alleviated only by the tender care of his old, faithful, and upright friend and attendant, Nathaniel Bumppo. His descendants rest this stone to the virtues of the master, and to the enduring gratitude of the servant." The Leatherstocking started at the sound of his own name, and a smile of joy illuminated his wrinkled features, as he said: "And did you say it, lad? Have you then got the old man's name cut in the stone by the side of his master's? God bless ye, children! 'Twas a kind thought, and kindness goes to the heart as life shortens." Elizabeth turned her back to the speakers. Effingham made a fruitless effort before he succeeded in saying: "It is there cut in plain marble, but it should have been written in letters of gold." "Show me the name, boy," said Natty, with simple eagerness. "Let me see my own name placed in such honor. 'Tis a generous gift to a man who leaves none of his name and family behind him in a country where he has tarried so long." Effingham guided his finger to the spot, and Natty followed the windings of the letters to the end with deep interest, when he raised himself from the tomb and said: "I suppose it's all right, and it's kindly thought and kindly done. But what have you put over the redskin? You shall hear. This stone is raised to the memory of an Indian chief of the Delaware tribe, who was known by the several names of John Mohegan, Mohican, lad, they call theirselves Hecan, Mohican, and Chingachgook. Gach, boy, Gachgook, Chingachgook, which interpreted means big sarpent. The name should be set down right, for an Indian's name has always some meaning in it. I will see it altered. He was the last of his people who continued to inhabit this country, and it may be said of him that his faults were those of an Indian, and his virtues those of a man." "You never said truer word, Mr. Oliver. Ah's me! If you had knowed him as I did, in his prime, in that very battle where the old gentleman who sleeps by his side saved his life, when them thieves, the Iroquois, had him at the stake, you'd have said all that, and more too. I cut the thongs with this very hand, and gave him my own tomahawk and knife, seeing that the rifle was always my favorite weapon. He did lay about him like a man. I met him as I was coming home from the trail, with 11 Mingo scalps on his pole. You needn't shudder, Madam Effingham, for they was all from shaved heads and warriors. When I look about me at these hills, where I used to could count sometimes 20 smokes, curling over the tree tops, from the Delaware camps, it raises mournful thoughts to think that not a red skin is left of them all, unless it be a drunken vagabond from the Oneidas, or them Yankee Indians who, they say, be moving up from the seashore, and who belong to none of God's creatures, to my seeming, being as it were neither fish nor flesh, neither white man nor savage. Well, well, the time has come at last, and I must go." "Go!" echoed Edwards. "Whither do you go?" The Leatherstocking, who had imbibed unconsciously many of the Indian qualities, though he always thought of himself as a civilized being, compared with even the Delawares, averted his face to conceal the workings of his muscles as he stooped to lift a large pack from behind the tomb, which he placed deliberately on his shoulders. "Go!" exclaimed Elizabeth, approaching him with a hurried step. "You should not venture so far in the woods alone at your time of life, Natty. Indeed, it is imprudent. He is bent, Effingham, on some distant hunting." "What Mrs. Effingham tells you is true, Leatherstocking," said Edwards. "There can be no necessity for your submitting to such hardships now. So throw aside your pack, and confine your hunt to the mountains near us, if you will go." "Hardship! 'Tis a pleasure, children, and the greatest that is left me on this side of the grave. No, no, you shall not go to such a distance," cried Elizabeth, laying her white hand on his deerskin pack. "I am right. I feel his camp kettle and a canister of powder. He must not be suffered to wander so far from us, Oliver. Remember how suddenly Mohegan dropped away." "I know'd the parting would come hard, children. I know'd it would," said Natty, "and so I got aside to look at the graves by myself, and thought if I left ye the keepsake which the Major gave me, when we first parted in the woods, ye wouldn't take it unkind, but would know that, let the old man's body go where it might, his feelings stayed behind him." "This means something more than common," exclaimed the youth. "Where is it, Natty, that you purpose going?" The hunter drew nigh him with a confident, reasoning air, as if what he had to say would silence all objections, and replied, "Why, lad, they tell me that on the big lakes there's the best of hunting, and a great range without a white man on it, unless it be one like myself. I'm weary of living in clearings, and where the hammer is sounding in my ears from sunrise to sundown; and though I'm much bound to you both, children, I wouldn't say it if it was not true, I crave to go into the woods again. I do." "Woods!" echoed Elizabeth, trembling with her feelings. "Do you not call these endless forests woods? Ah, child, these be nothing to a man that's used to the wilderness. I have took but little comfort sin' your father come on with his settlers; but I wouldn't go far, while the life was in the body that lies under the sod there. But now he's gone, and Chingachgook is gone, and you be both young and happy. Yes, the big house has rung with merriment this month past, and now I thought was the time to get a little comfort in the close of my days. Woods, indeed, I doesn't call these woods, Madam Effingham, where I lose myself every day of my life in the clearings." "If there be anything wanting to your comfort, name it, Leatherstocking. If it be attainable, it is yours. You mean all for the best, lad, I know, and so does Madam, too. But your ways isn't my ways. 'Tis like the dead there, who thought, when the breath was in them, that one went east and one went west to find their heavens. But they'll meet at last, and so shall we, children. Yes, and as you've begun, and we shall meet in the land of the just at last." "This is so new, so unexpected," said Elizabeth, in almost breathless excitement. "I had thought you meant to live with us and die with us, Natty." "Words are of no avail," exclaimed her husband. "The habits of 40 years are not to be dispossessed by the ties of a day. I know you too well to urge you further, Natty, unless you will let me build you a hut on one of the distant hills, where we can sometimes see you, and know that you are comfortable. Don't fear for the Leatherstocking, children. God will see that his days be provided for, and his end happy. I know you mean all for the best, but our ways doesn't agree. I love the woods, and ye relish the face of man. I eat when hungry, and drink when a dry, and ye keep stated hours and rules. Nay, nay, you even overfeed the dogs, lad, from pure kindness, and hounds should be gaunty to run well. The meanest of God's creatures be made for some use, and I'm formed for the wilderness. If ye love me, let me go where my soul craves to be again." The appeal was decisive, and not another word of entreaty for him to remain was then uttered. But Elizabeth bent her head to her bosom and wept, while her husband dashed away the tears from his eyes, and with hands that almost refused to perform their office, he procured his pocket-book, and extended a parcel of bank-notes to the hunter. "Take these," he said, "at least take these. Secure them about your person, and in the hour of need they will do you good service." The old man took the notes, and examined them with curious eye. "This, then, is some of the new-fashioned money that they've been making at Albany, out of paper. It can't be worth much to they that hasn't l'arning. No, no, lad, take back the stuff. It will do me no sarvice. I took care to get all the Frenchman's powder afore he broke up, and they say lead grows where I'm going. It isn't even fit for wads, seeing that I use none but leather. Madam Effingham, let the old man kiss your hand, and wish God's choicest blessings on you and your'n." "Once more let me beseech you, stay," cried Elizabeth. "Do not, Leatherstocking, leave me to grieve for the man who has twice rescued me from death, and who has served those I love so faithfully. For my sake, if not for your own, stay. I shall see you in those frightful dreams that still haunt my nights, dying in poverty and age by the side of those terrific beasts you slew. There will be no evil that sickness, want, and solitude can inflict, that my fancy will not conjure as your fate. Stay with us, old man, if not for your own sake, at least for ours." "Such thoughts and bitter dreams, Madam Effingham," returned the hunter, solemnly, "will never haunt an innocent parson long. They'll pass away with God's pleasure; and if the catamounts be yet brought to your eyes in sleep, 'tis not for my sake, but to show you the power of him that led me there to save you. Trust in God, madam, and your honorable husband, and the thoughts for an old man like me can never be long nor bitter. I pray that the Lord will keep you in mind, the Lord that lives in clearings as well as in the wilderness, and bless you, and all that belong to you, from this time till the great day when the whites shall meet the redskins in judgment, and justice shall be the law, and not power." Elizabeth raised her head and offered her colorless cheek to his salute, when he lifted his cap and touched it respectfully. His hand was grasped with convulsive fervor by the youth, who continued silent. The hunter prepared himself for his journey, drawing his belt tighter, and wasting his moments in the little reluctant movements of a sorrowful departure. Once or twice he essayed to speak, but a rising in his throat prevented it. At length he shouldered his rifle, and cried with a clear huntsman's call that echoed through the woods: "Here, here, pups! Away, dogs, away! You'll be footsore afore you see the end of the journey." The hounds leaped from the earth at this cry, and scenting around the grave and silent pair, as if conscious of their own destination, they followed humbly at the heels of their master. A short pause succeeded, during which even the youth concealed his face on his grandfather's tomb. When the pride of manhood, however, had suppressed the feelings of nature, he turned to renew his entreaties, but saw that the cemetery was occupied only by himself and his wife. "He is gone!" cried Effingham. Elizabeth raised her face, and saw the old hunter standing looking back for a moment on the verge of the wood. As he caught their glances, he drew his hard hand hastily across his eyes again, waved it on high for an adieu, and, uttering a forced cry to his dogs, who were crouching at his feet, he entered the forest. This was the last they ever saw of the Leatherstocking, whose rapid movements preceded the pursuit, which Judge Temple both ordered and conducted. He had gone far toward the setting sun, the foremost in that band of pioneers who are opening the way for the march of the nation across the continent. End of chapter 41. Recording by Bill Borst. End of the Pioneers, by James Fenimore Cooper.